Hello, my fellow Westorians. It's another Saturday stream, spoiler-filled, where we talk about the next episode and what's to come in the season. Anything goes. We also cover a little bit of what we missed last time. So, the name of this coming episode is...
Oh, and of course now.
Aww.
The Princess and the Queen.
Yeah, there it is.
Or the Blacks and...
There we go.
That, if you may have recognized that voice, that is Ian Glenn, a.k.a. Jorah Mormont, who was the narrator for the original publication of The Princess and the Queen. The Princess and the Queen has now been subsumed or consumed, or whichever word you want to use, by the World of Ice and Fire. I believe every word in The Princess and the Queen is in World of Ice and Fire. I forget if there's like a few sentences different, but it's pretty much all there. Same with the Rogue Prince. The Rogue Prince was a separate thing that became part of the World of Ice and Fire. Today, to help us discuss this excellent coming episode, as well as some other fun topics, is Kavita. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Kavita Mudan Finn, right? That's your full name. Did I say it right?
That's correct.
All right, cool.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us about who you are and what your knowledge is, and how. Let us set up this excellent discussion that we're going to have today. You're a medievalist, right?
I am. I'm a medievalist and an early modernist, strictly speaking.
Nice.
I work on I work on medieval stuff. I work on early modern stuff. I work on Shakespeare. I also work on popular medievalism. So I have actually edited a book on the original Game of Thrones.
Nice.
I've written a bunch of articles about A Song of Ice and Fire. And the book that I just finished, that just came out a couple of weeks ago, has a chapter on A Song of Ice and Fire, but also talks about a bunch of other relatively contemporary fantasy books, including the Devabad trilogy, which I love.
Yeah, you know, I'm a fan too.
And also the Priory of the Orange Tree, which is also wonderful. Yeah. So lots of good stuff in there.
Yeah, I love both of those books. I can recommend them as well, and I have. So yes, that's a great read to pick up. And you've also been covering the series on your WordPress blog, though, too, right?
I have, yes. I do recaps once a week for each episode. They tend to focus very much on Rhaenyra and Alicent because queenship and feminist historiography is kind of my thing. It's my wheelhouse. It's what I did my PhD on.
Nice.
So I tend to kind of focus in on those. If you want kind of military stuff, I am not the person to go to. But if you want court intrigue, history, weird stuff like that, and lots of talking about feminism, that's what I do.
Well, that is absolutely right down the middle for what this, not just this season, but this episode is bringing, and a lot of the discourse around it. So that is really perfect.
You've also done a little bit of podcasting about Our Flag Means Death, which I bring up because I've got an Our Flag Means Death shirt on in honor of that.
What a great show, yeah.
Yes, that's right. It is a fantastic show, and I am part of a podcast called The Shipping Cast. We have been... Yeah,
it's a good name.
We were originally The Shipping Forecast, but then we found out there was already a podcast called The Shipping Forecast, so we had to change it. But we are now The Shipping Cast, and we have a couple of episodes out, but we are hoping to get some more out soon.
You got some time before season 2 comes out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. Okay, well, we're going to definitely cover a lot of the things you mentioned that are already in your area of expertise. Certainly the idea that I think a lot of people are curious about in the real world is, how did it work out at courts when a king, or I guess a queen, I don't know if that's happened nearly as often, but a king who has children with multiple wives, and when they're living together, that seems like, I mean, I wouldn't want to live with in-laws. I think a lot of people, there's jokes about not wanting to live with your mother-in-law or your kids, someone else's kids, so it seems like it'd be a lot trickier when there's a throne at stake and dragons and all that other stuff. But yeah, so we'll get into that. That's gonna be a lot of fun. A couple of things to take care of. First, you can always, of course, catch our Monday episodes and Saturday episodes and any other episode live on YouTube, excepting the very few that aren't live when we record them. You can catch the replays on YouTube or Spotify. All the video action is there. Or you can catch the podcast replay versions anywhere you get podcasts, like Spotify, Amazon Music, iTunes, Google Play, etc. All that good stuff. You know how to find us. You can also submit questions. You can send them ahead of time if you are on Patreon. You can send them to us through there. You can hit us up on Discord or on Facebook in our Facebook group. It's almost 3,500 members in our Facebook group now. Lots of great discussions happening there. And, of course, you can always just send us an email, westeroshistory@gmail.com. Things we can talk about last week. From the behind the scenes on Driftmark last week, we had a cool, highly recommended, by the way, behind the scenes on Driftmark. Get to see the close-up of the treasures of the sea snake, and you can see the crab feeder's mask among those. That's something that I missed from last week. So it's just sitting there on a little pedestal. So the question was, how are you preparing for the actor swap? And to tell us about that interview that you said you love so much.
So I just read it this morning, and I only had the chance to read it once. But basically, one of the things that really drew them to the role of Rhaenyra was this kind of not quite gender dysphoria, but kind of this weird space that Rhaenyra occupies between being the heir, which is very much a male-coded role, and being the daughter, being a stepdaughter to Alicent, and also just being a woman, the way that everybody is treating her. And Emma Darcy, I think, is very kind of cognizant of the fact that they're stepping into a role that Millie Alcock really has made her own in the first half. And also, one of the things I think that Emma Darcy acknowledges is that Rhaenyra, when we meet her again, is a very different character than when we left her. Because if we think about the end of the last episode, it's that absolutely heartbreaking tableau of Rhaenyra and Laenor getting married. Laenor is so unhappy, and there's tears streaming down his face. Rhaenyra is also clearly unhappy. She doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know why everything has gone so horribly wrong. And then we pick it up again 10 years later, and it's not. I wonder how much information we're going to get about what happened in those intervening 10 years. Like, are we going to get a montage?
Yeah, so are we. Very curious. That it's the unprecedented for this show. There's other shows that have done big time jumps, but I'm with you. I really wonder how they're going to handle it. There's going to be some mentions of things in the background. Are they going to just remember that time when like a really interesting person?
Yeah, Emma, they were cast before Millie Alcock was cast. I think that's important for people to remember that Millie and Emily were cast because Emma and Olivia were cast.
Yeah, they were the first four casts, right? Emma, Olivia, Patty, and Matt. Now, as far as some other things we missed last week, Hobart Hightower had an interesting line. Wither, he said to Alicent, he said that she would wither, or was worried that she would wither.
Hobart,
yes.
Sorry.
We love calling him Hobart. And this is a nice little reference to Larys and the Bravos plant, which I think is in the real world, that's a hibiscus, but he calls it like malava or something else. I don't know. Anyway, Kavita, we're talking about Hobart, your favorite.
Yeah.
Hobart.
Yeah, so that was a nice little moment there. The wither, that's a nice little under the radar mention there. Vaymond and Hobart, also Hobart as well. Don't clap when the line "the second age of dragons" is pointed out. So there's at least two people that aren't so excited about that. Two relatively important people, especially Hobart. I mean, he's the Lord of the High Tower. That's a bit more than the Master of Complaints, which is Sir Vaymond's only title at this point.
Yeah, he's just a Sare. Yeah.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
I really can't believe I missed the line between Rhaenyra and Laenor. I was never much for dancing. It's not much different to combat. Like, oh, how did I miss that? We didn't cite that line. That's obviously dancing, Dance of the Dragons, combat. Yeah, the old dying of the what's that line? But we find the dying of the dragons would be more appropriate, but
more poetic.
The poetic license.
Well, and the dance that they were doing actually had like these fencing moves right in the middle of it, where they're sort of they're fake fencing with each other.
Yeah, and
I actually loved that bit.
Yeah, and it was
right
like
after
kind of
that
a
line.
Prehistoric bird dance is what they said the inspiration was, to make it seem like an actual dance of the dragons, like a mating dance of dragons was the inspiration. The like weird,
That's pretty cool.
I wonder if we're actually going to see a mating dance of dragons.
We're also really wondering where Damon went during the brawl. Like, he seemed to have vanished. Rhaenyra was there, and then she was still there, and Damon wasn't, because he had been grabbing her face right before things broke out. So my best guess is he just ran off with Lena, because that's where he's going to end up now. But it's typical of the year of the Red Spring that things would go a little wrong. But that is what we're covering today. In the episode tomorrow, they'll be covering the year of the Red Spring, which is the most momentous, probably, year before the dance. There's a lot of big events that happen, but as far as years where the most happens, I would call it this one. It's the year 120. So what makes that so interesting is that the show has been zooming forward, right? It takes big time jumps, none bigger than this one, obviously. But now, because there's so many events that are spread out that they want to cover, and they don't want to do, 30 episodes building up to the year 129 or building up to the war. They got to skip around a bit.
Yeah.
So instead, but this year, there's so much in the year 120, the year of the Red Spring, that they actually probably have to space it out a bit. For example, let's just go real quickly in book canon what goes through, or what happens in the year 120. The death of Laena and, of course, her child. The death of Laenor. Now, this one might be next episode. We'll see about that. But I figure this is not unlikely to be next episode, but it could be this one. Death of Lionel and Harwin. Aemond claiming Vhagar, which is also probably next episode. Damon and Rhaenyra marry, still in the same year. That's almost certainly next episode. That would be an awful lot to pack into this one. And given that Damon and Rhaenyra won't have Aegon the Younger this episode, future Aegon the Third, which does technically also happen in the year 120, though, in the book. So, wow, that's a lot for 1 year. So you can see why they probably won't do it all, even though they're trying to move pretty quickly. We do get the birth of Joffrey. Joffrey, of course, Velaryon, and in honor of Joffrey Lonmouth, which is kind of a neat, connecting point. We're jumping forward 10 years from the death of Joffrey to the birth of Joffrey, though. So it's kind of a neat little connecting point there. Not the biggest character, but he's kind of honored in that moment by...
It's funny because in the little preview we saw of Joffrey, he still has the blood on him from being born.
Oh,
which is very fitting. Again, we leave one Joffrey and bloody in death and join one Joffrey bloody in birth, basically.
And from book canon, we know that Laenor wanted to name the first one Joffrey and the second one Joffrey. Presumably not if the first one had been born Joffrey. He didn't want to name them all Joffreys. He's like, I want all my sons. I want 5 Joffreys.
He's going the George Foreman route, right?
He's going the George Foreman route, the Joffrey Foreman route. But they were like, no, not the first one. That one's going to be the king. Let's go with the traditional name. So Jacaerys. And then they were like, the second one, they're like, well, we need a spare. This one's going to be the Lord of Driftmark. So let's go with, okay, Lucerys. I wonder, is it going to be Lucerys or Lucerys?
Yeah, how are they going to say? That is my question. Yeah, how are they going to say Jacaerys, Lucerys?
So one thing we mentioned real briefly while you were off was the naming of Joffrey.
Whoops.
How we're going from the death of Joffrey to the birth of Joffrey, which is kind of a nice little touchdown there. Now, as far as, and of course, the reason that the firstborn wasn't Joffrey or the secondborn was because they wanted to have these traditional names. In, say, medieval times, was that a really important thing? Obviously, we hear lots of monarchs that have carrying a name a dozen or 15 times or 20 times. How important was that to have? Was that seen as a mark of stability, or was it just a way to honor your ancestors, or both? Or what do you think?
Yes and no. I mean, it really depended on the monarchy, because if you look at something like in England, they tended to switch around as a rule. You every now and again you'll get a string of Henrys or a string of Edwards or whatever, but it's not usually how it goes.
Okay.
That tends to denote actually upheaval.
Oh.
If you end up with a whole string of kings that have the same name, that usually indicates that some shit went down and they were trying to paper it over so that it looked more stable than it actually was.
Oh.
For instance, in the early 14th century, We late 13th, early 14th, we have Edward the First, Edward the Second, Edward the Third.
Mhm.
Edward the First, big crusading king, macho guy. If you ever saw the Mel Gibson movie Braveheart, but like they do a really they kind of they make him a lot meaner than perhaps he necessarily was. I don't know how bad he actually was. He might have actually been that bad, but like they make him just this absolute awful like villain, very Tywin Lannister-esque. And Edward II was his son. Edward II was, well, probably gay. We don't know for certain. Obviously, we can't be 100% sure. Possibly gay, possibly bi. Either way, he had a string of male favorites. And ultimately, even though he did have, he was married, he did have children, but he did also have this string of male favorites. And there was all of this bad publicity about his love life. And eventually, he was deposed and replaced by his son. And his son was Prince Edward, who became Edward III. And Edward III then went on to try and conquer France. So, like, you have kind of these three Edwards, and then there are no Edwards for another 100 years. Before suddenly there's one, then there's one, and then there's an attempt at a second, and then there are no more again for another 50 years.
Attempted Edward.
There are these names that come into fashion, and then they go away. Okay. Like, for instance, I don't think it's at all a coincidence that there are no Henrys after Henry VIII. There are no Henrys.
Yeah.
They're like, no, we're done. We are done with Henrys.
I called it the very mildest of spoilers that Dany's brother is named Viserys, because if Viserys had been really badly remembered, there wouldn't be any more Viseryses, you know, even though he's calling himself third of his name, he's not really king, but, you know, yeah. Maegor, there were no more Maegors, right?
No, there's no more Maegor after that. There's no more Rhaenyras either. You don't get any girls named Rhaenyra.
That's true.
That's true.
I don't see a lot of Alicents either now that you mention it.
True. There's some Alisanes, but there's no Alicent.
That's true. There are a few Damons, though, but those were a little intentionally provocative. So
yeah, you're right. That wasn't.
Damon Blackfire was 100% on purpose.
Yeah, that was like, I know who I'm making you think of. And
at that point, it's not even that far in the past either, because it's Dana who was like Damon's granddaughter.
Yeah,
right.
Only a few generations removed. Yes.
That's right. Yeah, it's really close. Yeah, it really kicks into that era right after. Yeah, you got Viserys the second, you got Daeron the first, and Aegon the Unworthy right after Viserys the second. Yeah. So, well, we'll talk about some of that more in a minute. Let's talk about Pentos first. We've been in the Stepstones, but really that was just beaches and rocks and fighting. We haven't really been to any overseas settlements yet.
Don't forget the crabs.
The crabs. We got the crabs. Yeah. Never forget the crabs. Those delicious, delicious crabs.
All you can eat crab buffet.
If you don't eat them, they'll eat you. That's the lesson that we learned. And so we haven't been to any castles or civilization outside of Westeros in this show. Obviously, we did plenty of that in Game of Thrones proper. But here we go to Pentos. We have a nice dinner in a courtyard, a fancy dinner with the Prince of Pentos, or is this the magistrate? Is the Prince of Pentos?
The Prince of Pentos,
nice.
This is Prince Regio Heratis, and we've seen him. We see him in some other shots here as well.
He looks like he wants something. That's a guy who this is not a Viserys, a kind of laid back kind of, I don't take care of problems unless they're in my face kind of look.
Yeah, the impression I get is he's like, look, you've been staying with me for a while. When are you gonna pay up and do something for me? That's the impression I get from this interaction, right? That like Lena and Damon are just living in Pentos, living it up, and people expect more from them.
Is he gonna ask for an egg? That's kind of what I'm guessing, that he'll ask for a dragon egg. We don't have that in Fire and Blood, but there's other examples of rulers who have had their hospitality tested by fancy visitors that ask for an egg.
Rhaena Targaryen, speaking of, we have young Rhaena here, but the original Rhaena, as it were, writer of Dreamfire, was asked for eggs at multiple stops when she was in the Westerlands. So here we have Damon and Lena's daughter, Rhaena, also cradling an egg, though.
And for people who haven't read Fire and Blood, if a guy from Pentos tries to get eggs, it's going to make people think of Illyrio. We know that we're pretty sure that Illyrio got those eggs from the Sea Lord of Braavos, which, you know, but a lot of folks don't know that. So this might call to mind Illyrio and Dany's eggs for some folks. My question for you, Kavita. Okay, so this whole idea that highborn people can just go overseas and show up at someone's court and get taken care of, that just seems a bit wild to us all, probably. It's like when you talk about highborn privilege, that's one of the things that people just, how does that work exactly? Can you just show up and be like, hey, I'm a noble too, I'm highborn, I'm on the run, can you help me out? And a lot of times they say yes. Like, can you talk us through how this whole thing even works and how that's possible, and what the host maybe hopes to get out of it? Because I think that's a lot of what's behind it.
Well, there's a great example actually from the Wars of the Roses. Yes. So we jump forward a couple of Edwards. We're now on Edward IV. So King Edward IV of England got kicked off his throne. That was unfortunate for him. And he ended up fleeing the country, crossing the Channel, and going to the Duchy of Burgundy. Now, the Duchy of Burgundy was a territory that comprises what is now like the Netherlands, Belgium, huge chunks of northern France, even down into Switzerland. Like that, it was a huge, powerful kingdom. And Edward's wife, who most of the English nobility did not like, because her family was not particularly highborn from an English standard. She actually had a lot of connections in Burgundy. Her mother was the cousin of the Duke of Burgundy. So Edward was able to show up in Burgundy, and even though the current Duke of Burgundy did not want him there, like this was super awkward. The French king is his neighbor. The French king has allied with the new king, with King Henry VI, who's now back on the English throne. Everything's super awkward. The Duke of Burgundy also happens to be married to Edward's sister, and Edward's sister is like, dude, you have to help my brother. And so Charles of Burgundy found himself in a super awkward situation. And he basically said, okay, Edward, you can stay in Burgundy, but you cannot stay in my palace. You can stay with somebody else in my court. And Edward happened to make friends with the richest man in Charles of Burgundy's court, a man named Louis de la Grotoise, and whose palace is still standing in the city of Bruges today. It is beautiful, like absolutely gorgeous. It's now a museum. But Edward got to live large, staying with the richest man in Bruges, who had the most amazing library. And like he just hung out there for about 9 months, and then eventually managed to convince the Duke of Burgundy to give him ships to send him back to England so that he could try and retake his crown. And against absolutely all of the odds, he succeeded.
Wow.
Oh yeah, this is some serious high drama. Like it. He comes back. He pretends to only be claiming his ancestral family lands, but then as soon as he's on land, he's like, "No, actually, I'm claiming the kingdom."
Psych.
Gathers armies in the north, goes down. Fights these two enormous battles, completely destroys the guys on the other side, and takes his crown back and rules for another 13 years. So he really kind of beat the odds on that, but he wasn't the only monarch who, when faced with political troubles, fled and stayed somewhere else. Like we have so many examples of this happening. And the reason that it works is because a foreign monarch, when faced with the possibility of, here, I can get a malcontent who has a claim to the throne in this other country, I can put them on my side, and possibly 10, 20 years down the road, I can help them usurp the throne. That has happened. Like that is something that has been successful in the past. That's how Henry Tudor got the throne of England in the first place. He had been kicked out of England because he had a claim to the throne. He stayed in Brittany first, then he went to France. Eventually, the French king, after complaining for years that this dude was sucking off him like a leash, eventually out, hey, England is actually kind of in turmoil right now. There's this guy, Richard III, on the throne that nobody likes. Maybe I can send this other guy over and mess it up in England. And that's exactly what the King of France did. Henry Tudor crossed the Channel, and in the year 1485 managed to defeat Richard III in battle and take the throne of England, and became Henry VII.
Nice.
And it was all because the French king gave him money and ships.
Nice. And so presumably this Duke of Burgundy who helped Edward IV, he got suitably rewarded.
I would hope.
Yeah.
Right? Something?
He had an alliance. He basically had a very good, very serious alliance with England. And it was a good enough alliance that a couple of years later, Edward actually crossed the channel again with an entire gigantic English army, supposedly to go to war with France alongside the Duke of Burgundy, except that the Duke of Burgundy flaked and ran off to Switzerland instead and got himself killed.
Oh, shoot.
So
Oops. I thought you were going to say he got himself some chocolate.
Edward got to reap all of the rewards. Instead, he cut a deal with the King of France and made lots and lots of money.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Game of Thrones. Yes, indeed.
It is. Yeah, there is a reason why George R.R. Martin picked up the Wars of the Roses and went, ooh, if I had dragons to this.
Yeah. By the way, I noticed you didn't mention any dragons. Where were the dragons during all that? Yeah.
The only dragon in residence was the one on Henry Tudor's banner. That's the red dragon.
Nice. Yeah. So in Pentos, we can guess that the Prince of Pentos has some angles here. He has something he wants or something he thinks he might want or might come in handy later. We know the Triarchy is Myr, Pentos, Myr, Tyrosh, and Lys, not including Pentos, and Pentos is very nearby them, so they would be perhaps threatened by the Triarchy or feel like encroached upon. And Damon, quite notably, is the biggest enemy of the Triarchy, so that is very relevant here. So it's an enemy of the enemy is my friend kind of situation, quite possibly. Mm-hmm. They look very fancy.
I'm willing to bet that part of the thing he's asking for is, hey, why don't you use those 2 giant dragons of yours to burn out the pirates currently occupying the stepstones?
Yeah, now that they've gotten back in there, yeah. That was like kind of 1 or 2 lines there that was mentioned in the trailer, that the stepstones have become a problem again because, as Damon said when he left, all I left was a bunch of bodies staked to the shore. That line of defense will only last so long. People are going to not be scared of that 10 years later. So yeah, the problem is returned, presumably.
Where are Damon and Lena parking these dragons?
Yeah, right. It's a whole landing strip.
Where are they putting them?
Yeah, where is the space for them? We know we're going to see them on their dragons. In the trailer, we have a shot of Damon and Lena on Dragonback together, but whether this is them like just riding around Essos, around Pentos? I'm not sure.
Where exactly are they? There's one shot where looks to be Pentoshi people seeing Vhagar overhead.
Yeah, you're right.
And
so
it looks like a giant bomber passing over, which it kind of is. You know,
hasn't Ryan Condal compared Vhagar to like a B-52 bomber?
I think he might
exactly.
have, yeah.
I think that is where
giant.
I think that's why Aziz has that in his head in the first place. But yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Those things were like indestructible. You'd shoot them they get hit by all sorts of anti-aircraft and they'd keep on going, and Vhagar apparently is falling apart. But you still don't want to fight her. What are those things on her back? It looked like strands of hair or rope or
it does look like Vhagar is hairy.
Yeah,
almost
I think maybe did they get it wrong, because in the book she's described as hoary, so maybe they just oh, you said hoary, I thought you said hairy. Whoops. Yeah, so they got that. I don't know. But clearly a substantial amount of time has passed. Not only are Damon and Lena now married, but they're about to have a third child, which, as we know, is going to result in her death, unfortunately. And we know that's going to happen relatively quickly, because she's already quite pregnant. It's not like there's a lot of time here that could be, snuck in between. She looks fantastic. Look at that. That is the Valyrian woman right there.
This is now Nana Blondell playing Lena. Only a short stint with Savannah, but I'm excited to see Nana.
It's a little funny that she's wearing green, but hey.
Yeah, it's like a Valarian green. Though.
You're right.
It's
a sea green.
Light green.
Yeah, it's a different shade, but yeah, that's funny.
And then we get lots of shots of Baela and Rhaena, and that's maybe on purpose, because they're going to be more important than Lena in the long run. Lena's memory will be huge. Her character will be huge, but not her presence. And I guess of the two, Baela will be a lot more important than Rhaena. Assuming things, as usual, standard disclaimer, we're going by what's in Fire and Blood. We obviously don't know what may happen, what they may change. The shots with the dragon egg are particularly notable. How cool is this, right? She's holding it in front of the fireplace.
So I see Agrimion says the showrunner said Vhagar has layers of old saddles on her back. Could be harnesses or something. And someone else says maybe they're ropes for climbing, like a rope ladder, because Vhagar's so
to
big.
actually
like,
get
to
up
actually
there.
get up
so
there.
huge. That's
Yeah.
probably why. It's
Yeah.
probably ropes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So like you should be able to
Because
get.
I don't think you can climb on. Like she can't sort of crouch down enough that anyone could actually climb on her back.
Wow, you just physically have to. She's so big, you got to climb up.
Lena
That totally
was
makes
great
sense.
in PE class at the rope climbing.
It's like the little stairs they gave for Viserys to get on his horse, but
Yeah,
it requires
it's
a
the
little more
dragon
fitness.
version of the little horse stairs. I think that's
Wow.
got it. That makes sense actually. 'Cause
Things you don't consider when animals
Yeah,
are that
there we
large. Wow.
Many
Yeah, that really
ropes.
could be just to get around on her back, and that's amazing.
Makes
Love it.
me feel like a bunch of people could just be hanging onto those ropes at one time. That's how she takes the groceries home.
So there's another shot of them on the roof together, Damon without Lena, just with the two daughters. I have a sinking feeling this is like talking to them after her death or something, but
God, the scene on the roof. Yeah, Oh.
I have that bad feeling, but because if that's not it, it's got to be in there somewhere. I mean,
They
well,
look upset to me.
I
Bela
think
and
there's
Rhaenyra.
tears. Yeah, I think there might be tears. Like it's hard to see for sure. And there's that other moment inside where they're holding each other in a corner where they're wearing the same outfit, their pajamas. So
I was trying to see if I
I
could
think
see.
that these two scenes must be connected. Them seeing something that shocks them or surprises them, and then them going out on the roof afterwards. So anyway, yeah, not looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the episode, but yeah, not looking forward to the kids reacting to their mom passing. Super chat from Morley says, looking forward to episode 6. Thank you, Aziz, Ashay, and all your guests for all the amazing content and discussions. Love the kitties. Yeah, we love the kitties too. They're looks like they're taking it easy today, and I don't know if we'll see any on stream this day, but
Speaking of pets, I'm actually hearing barking. I'm just going to go open that door. And see
Yeah,
what's
take care.
inside. I'll be right back.
hopefully you don't need any ropes to climb up on your dog. So let's see, what else do we have here in Pentos? If we look forward a little bit to kind of remind ourselves of what's going to happen, Bela and Rhaena get betrothed to Jace and Luke early in life. So that's probably next episode. Could be as soon as this one, but I'm guessing that's next episode. Maybe when they gather for
What?
the funeral.
Oh yeah.
When Bela and Rhaena get betrothed to Jace and Luke.
Yeah. Yeah, I would guess that that's a next episode. That's like a post funeral
Yeah.
thing.
In book, it actually happens before the Red Spring. So that's the small, but again, there've been lots of small changes like that. It's not, obviously I'm not complaining. Moving things around a little bit I'm never going to complain about that. It's what happens is what matters, not the order it happens. Usually, obviously, sometimes it matters.
Yeah.
And notably too, it's easy to forget or maybe realize that you never thought about it. It's Bela betrothed to Jace and Rhaena betrothed to Luke, which is obviously significant since Jace is the heir. Even though Bela and Rhaena are twins, Bela's the taller one, and that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, that is Bela on the left here. I'm trying. Like, if you have trouble remembering, you can remember Bela is the taller one in the show, and Bela has kind of a rounder face.
Yeah.
But
And of course, by episode 7, they won't be kids anymore. So they'll be not teenagers, but they'll be a little older.
yeah,
I guess.
like young. I mean, they might technically still be teen. They might be like 18 or 17, but I think they might technically still be teens, but older, right? I don't know how old they'll be.
Yeah.
It's interesting because in the book, in Fire and Blood, there's only about a 5-year period between when Rhaenyra and Laenor get married and the deaths of Lena and the Red Spring.
Mm-hmm.
Because Rhaenyra and Laenor get married, I think early 114, and the Red Spring is 120. So they've got about 6 years. Also, God, she has 3 kids in 6 years.
Yeah.
A lot of kids.
That is
Like she's just pregnant. Oh my God, I look at those dates and it gives me hives.
what a pace, right? In book canon, Rhaena has a hatchling die early in life. Maybe we'll see that. Maybe we'll get the hatchling, and then maybe that's what they're reacting to rather than Lena going into labor or something.
Yeah, I mean,
like that.
we see Rhaenyra with her egg, so we presumably might see, that egg hatch, and oh no, she doesn't actually have her dragon yet.
Yeah, but she does get a dragon much, much later. It hatches in the Vale near the end of the war. It's morning light, and it doesn't, of course, become part of the war. It's one of the few dragons that is not part of the war at all. And she spends her life in the Vale with Jane Eyre, living the kind of life that Alicent thought was romantic that Rhaenyra didn't want, which is just having all the different knights of the Vale try to win her favor. And that's her life. So Rhaenyra's not bad for at least for the dance. And then after the dance, she marries Corwin Corbray, and he passes, and then she marries Garmin Hightower, and she has 6 daughters with Garmin Hightower. But both of those things are after the war, so they're not going to come up.
It would be so funny if we're just all this fighting is going on, and then you just cut to Rhaenyra, and she's just dealing with this this Tinder type situation. She's just dealing with some love interest.
Keeps swiping left.
Yeah,
she's just kicking back, having a grand old time, just I sure am glad to be in the Vale right now. Meanwhile, Bela is going to have all kinds of stuff to do. She's going to be a very important character. Maybe not right away. Obviously, in book canon, it's a little while before she starts being important in terms of doing things. She's always important given who she is, but her bloodline and all that. But yeah, she'll go to Dragonstone. She probably marries Oakenfist. I mean, that is in book canon. We won't see that marriage most likely, but we probably will meet young Alan Valerian next season, if not season 3. We'll almost certainly meet him.
Even if we don't see them get married, I think we'll see their connection. Form. You'll know, oh, these two are gonna be together after all this is over. Yeah,
she runs to him when told she has to marry. So she knew what she was doing. I think she didn't just pick some random lord to run to, like we discussed. He was her Duke of Burgundy.
There you go.
And speaking of, Alan was born a year before Bela and Rhaenyra, and Adam Velaryon the year before that. So a lot of kids have been born off screen.
So presumably, if we're thinking that Alan and Adam are Corlyses, then this is around Corlys has cheated on Rhaenys at this point. Although if you are not a Corlys as the father truther, then I guess you think that something else happened here.
Yeah, and for some strange reason, Laenor, who apparently isn't interested in women at all, decided to go sleep with this woman.
I really think that these are Corlys' kids, but people really argue with us about it. So it's not as much of a cut and dry thing as I tend to think it is.
And maybe book Laenor is different. We can't assume that book Laenor is show Laenor.
I really think he's gay, but he could be bi. He could be something else. And I'm really very skeptical that this is not I think that Alan and Adam are going to be Corlyses.
Yeah, I do too. What do you think, Kavita?
I think, I assumed in the book that they were Corlys' kids. The only way that I could possibly see them making it work is there's that one almost throwaway line that Laenor has in his scene with Rhaenyra on Driftmark, where they're walking on the beach, where Rhaenyra's talking about sort of personal tastes and so forth, and Laenor replies, "Not for lack of trying."
Oh, not for lack of trying.
Only thing. It seems I don't know that if they're planning to set it up that way.
Maybe that was just
I don't know.
Mystery,
that's the only reason I could think of that they would actually try to make the kids Laenors. But I personally believe that this is Corlys, they're Corlys' kids.
It is a decent point, especially because we do get this scene where Corlys is pretty against the idea of Laenor. Just he's well, maybe not for the idea that Corlys would take Laenor to a brothel and be and try and maybe even do that multiple times, because that's the thing. That's the problem, is that it's not like there's just one child, there's two with the same person. So that's pretty damning to me for it not just being a random liaison. But you're absolutely right that is what leaves it open.
All right, son Laenor, here's a brothel. Have anyone, you can pick anyone you want. He's looking at the bouncer
yeah. I mean, as a brothel, you would have had anyone I want.
The
really.
other thing is though that Mouse isn't a sex worker though.
Yeah, you're right.
That's a good point. This is
Mouse. Well, the description that we have of her, she's not Marilda. I think is a real name.
Yeah, totally.
And she's not at any point described as a sex worker. She's described as a sailor. She's described as a ship's captain.
Yeah, she's very much not that.
Which is very much Corlys's type.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True.
More so than Laenor's. But again, I don't know what I would be curious to see, I'm very curious to see how they're going to spin that, because of course, like the way that they've written Corlys and Rhaenys as this wonderful, like functional married couple, which I love. They're like the only functional married couple on this show.
Yeah.
At least until, I mean, I'm hoping Rhaenyra and Laenor, it looks like we're getting like good
Yeah.
kind of couple vibes from them. But thus far, it seems to me that the only functional marriage on this show is Corlys and Rhaenys.
Yep. I can see. Hard to disagree with that. Yeah.
People are going to have trouble justifying it for sure if he's cheating on Rhaenys. There is a world, I don't think they'll go with it, but there is a world in which Rhaenys and Corlys have that agreement that they have decided, hey, sometimes you go sailing and you're away from me for 6 months of the, like maybe it's one of those situations. He was out, it was a long distance thing. I don't expect them to necessarily go into it, but we'll see if we see Rhaenys' reaction to this, how betrayed she really is.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. Yeah. I also see a comment from Curtis Franks here. He says it's smart of them to include kids very visually in these time jumps. It really helps show the aging of the children, really helps show how much time has passed, which is ironic because Game of Thrones proper was known for not aging up the babies to keep it simpler. So it made it confusing. Wait, how much time has passed? Wasn't that a baby like a year ago, But here they've a lot more cognizant. It's too much. It's a lot more important to the storytelling to have the ages be paid proper attention to. Whereas in Game of Thrones, they could afford to mess around a little with that.
To a certain extent, although we still have things like Viserys and the Great Council in episode 1 where you're like, really? Like, he should have been younger there.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that leads to confusion for people like our co-host Sean, who's like, how old is Viserys?
Yeah, exactly.
So how old is Viserys supposed to be?
Yeah, I as he's looked it up, but I still don't believe it. I'm like, he looks older.
Well, now he's going to be like in his early 40s
and looking like he's 70.
Yeah, I think he dies when he's 51 if I remember right, because he was born in 77.
Yeah, like 51 or 52 I think is when he dies.
Yeah, 52. Yeah, it's 52 because he died, or unless he hasn't had his birthday yet that year, but he dies in 129 and he's born in 77. So yeah, that's about right.
And yeah, he looks great.
And speaking of children, this is we've mentioned several already, but I have a section in our document called a cacophony of children. You got to have our Song of Ice and Fire titles in there because there's so many, and there's so many more that aren't even mentioned that we know have been born in this era. So many important figures. Let's go through it real quick. We're going to be introduced to a new version of Aegon. We've seen him before. And a new version of Helaena. We've seen a baby version of her. And we're going to see Aemond. So completely first time seeing Aemond. Look at Aegon. That is not the pose of a kid that you get a sense of, oh, this is a nice boy.
Yeah.
This I think we're meant to see cocky, like rich kid type look, and then they're really emphasizing his hair. That's like super on purpose to have his super long blonde hair to make him blatantly Targaryen looking. In contrast to the Strongs. Now there's Aemond, obviously smaller. To these two who look very not Targaryen, just extremely un-Targaryen. Like they look like Strongs, because that navy blue, which is like a black blue, it looks kind of blue here. And it makes them look like trident colored. It really looks more colored than anything.
Yeah, you're right, though. I didn't even think about that. Their actual, the outfits that they're wearing is very strong Riverlands looking.
Yeah. So, Kavita, question for you. In terms of looks, has this come up in questions of parentage in medieval times or other periods of history that you know of where it just... that kid couldn't possibly be the son of the king or whatever, and that causes problems. What kind of historical precedent do we have for situations like this?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. There's a lot. Yeah. This often came up. And anytime someone wanted to discredit the current monarch, one of the easiest ways to do it was to claim that either the monarch or the monarch's child was illegitimate. It was a go-to. People were doing it all the time. And half the reason that we have these modern accounts of adulterous queens are probably because of this kind of propaganda. It's probably because of this kind of rumors and gossip and that kind of thing. Because there are a lot of cases where probably the queen was not unfaithful. Probably the queen was just doing her job. And it just so happened that the kid came out looking different.
Yeah.
And like, for instance, so again, back to the Wars of the Roses. It's always Wars of the Roses for me. This is my area. So there is a pretty famous instance. So the mother of King Edward IV and King Richard III was named Cecily Neville. And she had 14 children. She had a lot of children.
Jeez.
And some of them looked like her, and some of them looked like her husband. And by the end, she had, when the Wars of the Roses were really kicking into full gear, she had 4 sons. And supposedly, like this, obviously, this is entirely based on hearsay. This is entirely based on kind of primary source reportage. So we don't have contemporary portraits of any of them. But supposedly Edward and his second brother George looked more like their mother, and Richard looked more like his dad. And then, so later on, fast forward several decades, Edward IV is dead. Also, I think around like 40 something years old. He died much younger than people expected him to. He's the king I argue that Robert Baratheon is based on. He was muscled like a maiden's fantasy, the whole shebang when he was very young. There is this great reference in one of the French sources that refers to him as the handsomest prince in Christendom, only now he's gotten fat. Like, it's a completely fat-phobic source, but there you go. Because he, like, he's the one, he got kicked out in the middle of his reign, came back to the throne again. As soon as he took the throne again, he apparently really got into binge eating, binge drinking, and binge womanizing. So he did all of those things. By the end, he died of pneumonia by going fishing in April. So, yeah, unfortunate. And the problem was that after his death, supposedly, we still to this day do not know if this is true. Supposedly, his marriage was invalid. And the 8 or so children that he had with his queen were declared bastards. They were declared illegitimate. And his younger brother, Richard III, took the throne. Supposedly because his nephews were illegitimate. We probably think he was planning to take the throne anyway. But one of the supposed kind of publicity stunts that he pulled, again, we don't know that he actually did this. It just shows up in one of the sources, is that he had several speeches given talking about how, boy, Edward sure looks like my mom, but not my dad. Because there was this rumor that had gone around some years earlier that Edward was not his dad's son. Edward was illegitimate. There was even a story that was spread in the French court that Edward was the son of an archer named Borgia. They even had a name for his supposed dad. So, like, there was this whole story. It got hushed up, and then again, in 1483, when Edward died, it came back out into the open and is now mentioned in every single source that happens afterward as something Richard III said about his mom. So, like, it's in the 16th century sources, especially in Shakespeare, like Richard comes out and says, yeah, my mom definitely didn't commit adultery, but I'm going to tell everyone that she did because I'm evil. Yeah.
Jeez. Amazing. So that's totally then, yeah. So it fits. This is basically pretty real world accurate then in the way this is played out in a lot of ways then. Because you've got, like George typically does, he turns it up to 11. These kids really don't look like either of their parents. I mean, well, I mean, they're real parents. They look like Harwin. Yeah, they look like their dad, who isn't supposed to look like their dad. Yeah. They don't look like the guy who's supposed to be their dad. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Yeah. So, and
one of the things you mentioned actually in the sort of half season recap that you guys did earlier this week, it was interesting that the changes that they made, taking away Rhaenys' black hair, making Rhaenys fair, like silver haired, and making Aemma silver haired as well. They pulled away all of the plausible deniability. Like, because in the books, we don't know what the Arryns look like. Like, I kind of assumed that Aemma, because we have some Targ kids who marry out of the Targaryen family and they end up looking like whoever else. So I kind of had assumed that maybe Aemma was kind of brown haired or just kind of didn't look obviously Targaryen. And that could have been a way for Rhaenyra to go, oh, she just takes after my mom.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
We totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, like we said, if you didn't catch the Wednesday stream, y'all, the general idea is that, like, I think that the fact that they made those changes points to them doing this on purpose.
They're
like,
turning it up to 12.
Yeah.
They're like 11's not
But
enough.
yeah, you put it exactly right. They're removing any plausible deniability. Like maybe you prefer there to be some plausible deniability, but they clearly didn't want that to be there. That's why they made this change.
No.
Yeah. So they're like all the different excuses that fans like us came up with, like, well, it could be this. They went and read all those and did systematically remove those possibilities. So yeah, it was pretty well done as far as like, eliminate all possibilities. That's good. It was well done. Yeah. Getting back to the children real quick, and then we'll discuss more of the drama around them. There's so many more kids yet to come, most of whom will probably not be mentioned until they show up as adults, but I still want to mention that they're born around this time. We said Adam and Alan. Cassandra Baratheon, who the one is going to be betrothed to Aegon II after Helaena passes, but they're never actually going to get married. But all those sisters, Cassandra and all the Baratheon sisters, one of whom will also be betrothed to Aemond, and the other one will taunt Aemond and call him a coward.
And who we'll see at the end of the season.
Yeah, who taunts him into going after Luke. So, yep. The Red Kraken is born around this time. Black Alley Blackwood as well. Bloody Ben Blackwood, born around this time. Kermit Tully, born a few years before. Glendon Good, the guy who's Lord Commander for one day, is born around this time. Lionel Hightower.
Okay, so wait, I have a question here. If Lionel Hightower is born now, is this a case of the Hightowers currying favor with the hand of the king, Lionel Strong? Like,
it could be.
It's just like,
Could be.
It's very notable to me, a Hightower naming their child Lionel during this time.
Yeah, you're
especially
right.
given what's happening with Lionel. Like, it was Lionel Hightower born before or after the Lionel's before his death. Yeah.
In books, I think he was born right before.
Okay.
I think he was born before.
Anyways.
No, not right before. Right after Otto was dismissed, I think he was born.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it would have been right. Would have been. I think it was 111 or 112.
But no, I never really clocked that before. But
maybe
that's
someone was trolling Otto. Maybe it was like a Hightower relation. Like, hey, I'm going to name this kid. I'm going to name my kid after your replacement.
Yeah, I wonder if they're gonna. I wonder if they're gonna bother with this. Maybe not. But this would be Ormond's son, not Hobart's.
Okay.
But Hobart is Hobart is they combined Hobart and Ormond into one. Hobart into one person.
Yeah.
So.
Hobart.
Yeah, Hobart.
Yeah, they combined him. So yeah, it's unclear whether we'll get an Ormond or what.
Yeah. And Trystane Truefire, also born around this time, as well as Lara Rogare, who will marry Viserys to be Viserys II. Aegon III, of course, yet to be born, but will be very soon. Viserys II, as I just mentioned, and of course, poor baby Visenya. Jaehaerys and Jaehaera also have to be married too. Not only do we have this Aegon and Helaena, but they're going to have kids. I mean, 3 of them before the war breaks out. There's so many more kids to come. Gaiman Palehair as well is yet to be born, but will be soon. And Lorien Lannister, Jason's little kid that he'll have before he goes off and dies in the Riverlands.
Which also means Jason
we'll all be happy to see
married.
him go.
Yeah,
Jason will marry
obviously,
Johanna.
Jason hasn't been married at the time of Rhaenyra's wedding feast with Laenor because he arrives alone, so he has not gotten married yet.
Yeah. I keep forgetting what's going to happen to Tyland, too. We talk about Jason, like, oh, that guy's just going to die. Don't worry about it. But Tyland is going to be, like, the hooded hand. I mean, that guy gets his eyes and lips and nose. And I mean, we don't need to talk about that too much.
Yeah, I don't know how graphic they're going to be with that, especially considering that they sort of toned it down in the original series with Tyrion's injuries.
Yeah, maybe just the hood. They'll just leave it to be.
Yeah.
Let us wonder.
They'll leave it. If I were them, that's what I would do. I would just sort of have the hood and just little glimpses and just leave it to the audience's imagination. It's so much more effective that way.
Yeah, I agree. King's Landing. Let's go to King's Landing. The trailer opens with a famous reenactment. One of Doug Wheatley's famous pieces from Fire and Blood is shown at the beginning of the trailer. It's so cool. The two Princess and the Queen black and green moment.
Yeah.
I love it. And also there's a great shot of them in front of the throne where it focuses on Alicent and then the camera fades out and focuses on Rhaenyra, and they're both very distinct and they're black and green. So the subtext is pretty straightforward there. Yes, very much so.
Yeah, but for right now, we still mainly just have Rhaenyra in these like golds and creams and reds that she's wearing in these like very notable to me that she is not costumed yet in darker in the black clothing, basically. Like, so like she will at some point make a fashion statement of her own, though, clearly.
And we also have a shot of Laenor and Rhaenyra talking.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if this is King's Landing. I think it is King's Landing.
I think it's King's Landing.
Looks like King's Landing.
I think it is.
And I don't know why they'd be elsewhere given she gives birth and shows the child to Alicent right away. So it makes sense that they would be there. But this looks like it would be after that. She doesn't look pregnant anymore.
Mm-hmm. She looks like, she looks like she's still pretty quickly after having given birth, though.
Yeah. And look at that chair. That's like dragon scale, the one that no one's sitting in. That is a nice looking chair. I want that chair. Looks nice. Purple and green. And
they've got like on the table, they've got all these like figurines of animals.
Yeah, that's cool, huh?
Probably because they have kids that want to play with stuff.
Is something knocked over on the
I bet
table?
those are kids' toys.
Yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah.
They're playing with like,
is.
that's like a looks almost like a bull and a horse, or like just different
figures. Yeah.
figures.
If that's supposed to be their bedroom, it looks believably full of kids.
Yeah.
Like with 2 kids.
Yeah, like,
that looks as someone who has 2 children, that is what my house looks like.
There's a toy right there.
There's
too.
one like
Not that
knocked
nice,
over. Yeah, like
Their toys aren't quite as fancy, huh?
But
no, my kids' toys are made of plastic. But
it's
Not
funny
of gold
because
and
Aegon too, back in the earlier episode, he had a dragon figurine that he was playing with, and so here these boys don't have dragon figurines; they've got like horses
and elephants. There's an elephant there.
Yeah.
Lynette Carter wants to know about Oscar Tully. Did I mention that Kermit Tully was born around this time? I guess Oscar is a little after that. So.
Yeah.
Or is Oscar his brother or his son? I forget.
I thought Oscar was his brother.
Yeah.
I thought it was Grover and then Kermit and Oscar.
And then Elmo.
Where's Elmo? Elmo's in there somewhere too.
Elmo's the younger one. I think he's the one that takes over for Kermit. Kermit dies. I think Elmo takes over, and Elmo's the one who kills.
Oh, yeah. Elmo's
Boros.
grandfather is Grover. So, yeah, it is multi-generational, yes.
And Oscar's the brother that founds the sellsword company, I think.
Elmo is Kermit's father. Yes, okay. So,
Elmo is Kermit's father. Oh, I got it backwards. So
very confusing all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's funny because remember there's that exchange between Miguel Sapochnik and Ryan Condal where Miguel's like, we got to change some of these names. And Ryan's like, we can't. You know, he's like, no, it doesn't matter that there's so many Aegons and Darons, and we got to keep that. He's like, these ones, there might be like a copyright issue here. I don't know. Maybe not. It's just names. Like, you can't.
Well, HBO technically owns Sesame Street.
Really?
Yeah, they do. Yes.
Then there won't be. All right, then we'll probably get them.
They could get it. Yeah, it's.
They could. I don't know if they would, though.
Yeah.
I feel like they would. People might think that that's too distracting.
This is too fourth wall breaking.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't actually like these are in there.
See, I love it. I'm on board.
I poo-poo the Muppet Tullys. Yeah.
I'm like,
To be fair, though, Kermit is a real name.
That's
like
true. So is Elmo.
My husband many years ago applied for a judicial clerkship with a judge named Kermit.
I think really only Grover is. I mean, even Grover is a real name. Like there was a
Grover,
president
yeah,
named
exactly.
Grover,
Yeah,
but like
exactly.
I haven't met someone named Grover. It's like a name that no one uses anymore.
There's like a GOP guy named Grover Norquist.
Oh yeah,
who is unfortunately still around.
Yeah, I think for me, I can hang with the Oscar and the Grover in world just fine. But yeah, I could see why people would be like Elmo and Kermit a little too far. So.
Elmo maybe not.
Yeah, Elmo in particular, but it's so funny.
Yeah.
I mean, notwithstanding that Saint Elmo is a thing.
We have a friend. Yeah, we have a friend and a listener of the podcast, Chuck Lazaro, who has a great cosplay of Elmo, like a full Elmo Tully. Like, I mean, I should send you a picture sometime, Kavita. It's like, it's the full Elmo, but dressed in full Tully raiment. It's awesome. He also has the Kermit though. He's got both Elmo and Kermit, and it looks amazing.
Yeah, I mean
cool.
They're all 4 real names. It's just they're definitely like the Muppets have taken them over, except for Oscar, I guess.
Yes, they have.
Yeah, Oscar's still.
Well, I maintain if there are any Tully girls, they have to be named Zoe and Abby.
Yeah, which are far more normal names at this point. Speaking of names, let's go to the small council. We got a scene there. They're discussing the stepstones. But I think it's a little tricksy because there's 2 spots where we see the small council in these scenes, but in one of these spots, it's an overhead shot where there's no Viserys. Mm-hmm. And there's another one where clearly Viserys is sitting there. So there's must be two small council scenes, one with Viserys and one without. We see Rhaenyra with the quorum ball,
her trackball.
She's using it as a trackball too. Look, she's got one finger on it.
I've seen a great edit on Twitter of Rhaenyra, like as if she was actually using a trackball mouse, and like then the next slide is of a computer screen and what she's looking at.
Yeah,
because that is the vibe. But no, so that is the question. In our Wednesday episode, we speculated that that was her father, that was Viserys' ball, and that she was taking his place on the council. But the point was raised that Rhaenyra is now of age. She should just be on the council normally, whether Viserys is there or not. So she should have a ball of her own, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And she's the heir to the throne, and we said before that this should be a role she should have had sooner, being brought up and taught and how to rule and all that. I have a question for you, Kavita. Let me set it up a bit here. Mm-hmm. One theme throughout this show is that every single person that's either close to power, might come into power, or is in power, pretty much never taught to rule ahead of time. Viserys wasn't groomed to rule. He became nominated after his uncle and father died, and they were groomed to rule. And Viserys isn't really doing a good job of grooming Rhaenyra to rule. And as we'll see, Rhaenyra won't really do a good job with her kids, and Alicent's not really going to do a great job with hers and raising them to rule. They're more going to be raised to fight for what's theirs rather than what to do with the throne once they have it. And it's just like generations of this. It seems like, and even Jaehaerys and Alysanne weren't taught to rule. It just worked out. They were just good at it.
They were just curious-minded people who like to study and learn about stuff.
Maegor wasn't taught to rule. I mean, he shouldn't have been. He just seized the throne anyway. And Aenys was really the only one that was kind of taught. And he did an okay job, but even he had many shortcomings. But so how is that? Speak to us about that in the education of rulers in medieval times. Is this a common thing where you see people inherit their titles or thrones with very little thought to how they're going to handle all that?
It was one of those things. It really depended on what was going on during the reigning monarch's reign, because a lot of whether or not a child was trained to rule had a lot to do with what was going on with their parents. So for instance, like to go back to my go-to, Edward IV, he had two sons, and his older son was actually trained to rule. He was sent when he was actually younger than people necessarily expected. They actually sent him away from his parents, away from the rest of his family. He had his own castle on the Welsh border at Ludlow, and he had tutors. He had servants. He had a steward. He had an entire miniature royal household, and he was in charge despite being only like 8 or 9 years old. He was in charge. I mean, granted, like he was being guided by his uncle at the time, like his mother's older brother, Anthony Woodville.
What I'm hearing here is that he had a rehearsal, like Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal, where he practiced a little. They built him a middle miniature. That's what I'm hearing exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Exactly what they did, because they basically gave him the opportunity to practice on a smaller scale. This is how you rule a territory. And this was relatively common, actually, within the English setting, within the English context. They would send, the monarch would send their kid to Wales. And it was always Wales. It was always freaking Wales.
Prince of Wales.
They would always send them to Wales because they considered Wales to be a backwater. To be fair, Wales was basically an English colony at this point. They had wiped out the ruling royal family of Wales and taken over and built a bunch of these giant castles to control everything. And the Welsh hated them. Absolutely hated them. They still hate them to this day. So they said they would send their kids to Wales. Like Henry V went there. Edward IV actually went there as well, even though he was not in the line of succession. His dad sent him there to a different castle in Wales. Henry V was sent to Shrewsbury, and Edward IV was sent to Ludlow with one of his brothers. And the two of them were raised there on their own. Again, kind of just learning how to rule from tutors and other lords. So that was actually a relatively normal thing. Like even earlier, even if we're looking at kind of the period that George was probably basing the Dance of the Dragons on, which is the anarchy of the 12th century.
Yeah.
The woman who Henry I, his daughter, the woman who he had designated as his heir, Empress Matilda, she had actually had ruling experience because she had been married to the Holy Roman Emperor. That's why she was called Empress Matilda. She had been married to the Holy Roman Emperor when she was 7. And she spent at least, I think, 10 or 12 years there before her husband died. And she was very much part of the ruling system. She knew how to rule a kingdom. But the problem was that once she was named her father's heir, instead of bringing her to England, introducing her to everyone, putting her in charge, making her interact with the people that she was going to rule, he sent her to France and married her to not a minor French nobleman, a fairly major French nobleman, but one that no one else liked. And so he married her to this man, Geoffrey of Anjou, and the two of them were ruling in Anjou and Normandy, but she never actually managed to interact with the people she was supposed to be ruling in England, which is part of the reason why when her father died and she was still in Normandy, her cousin, Stephen of Blois, was able to kind of sidle in and be like, hey guys, I'm a man. How about I take over England?
Even though he had no ruling
experience.
And
a bunch of the English nobility took him up on it. I mean, they both had ruling experience on kind of the micro level, just like not like the
his
kingdom
lands.
level.
Yeah, like his own like acreage. Yeah.
So
he was in charge of his own lands.
Yeah, I'm obviously you brought up Wales, and so like we do have Dragonstone as our comparison there as well, and that's where I assume some of these Targaryen heirs they break their teeth a little bit on Dragonstone and rule it a little bit, right?
Yeah, and that is a little bit out of the way too. Like that's the parallels there are strong because you're not really interacting with a lot of the people you're going to be ruling when you're over in this island, Dragonstone. Like it's shown that way really early on in like Game of Thrones. Even Stannis is like the king's brother, but he's just gone, and he's just not that far away. But he seems like he's far away because he's on this island that.
And that's what we're about to see, right? In the show is that Rhaenyra is going to just go to Dragonstone. She's going to isolate herself over in Dragonstone and not really be among the people.
That's going to hurt her claim when it comes around, is that she's not going to have these alliances and these people that know who she is. She'll come a little bit off.
Here's the question that I have, though.
Go ahead.
Part of the reason that Stannis is so isolated on Dragonstone is because he has to go everywhere by ship.
Yeah.
If you have dragons, are you isolated?
That's true. She doesn't have to be, I think. So that is an interesting point because she's more chooses this. She doesn't want to go interact. She wasn't taught how important it was, for one thing. And maybe it's just part of her disposition. We've seen this when she's growing up. She didn't really care about the opinion of the commoners during the play. Damon told her why she should, but that's kind of been her attitude. She's like,
well, I think it extends beyond Rhaenyra too, though, because I have to look at Jason for example as the heir to the heir, and he has a dragon, and is he going to go back and forth to King's Landing and Dragonstone, or just be just as isolated as his mother? Because I mean, at least she grew up in King's Landing. She grew up in the situation. But if she retreats and takes her young boys to Dragonstone, then they're not growing up in the court at all, really.
Yeah, because one does wonder, because this period in Fire and Blood, like if you actually look at the text of Fire and Blood, the sort of period between the Red Spring and the start of the Dance with the Dragons is kind of glossed over in a lot of ways. Like we get really specific events, but we don't know what was going on in the interim. And one of the things that I can say based on sort of my reading of it as a historical source with scare quotes, is that there's probably a ton of stuff that's just not making it in there.
Yeah, it's got to be.
Because what you don't talk about is when things go right.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the angle that Gildane is taking in Fire and Blood, it's all about how everything was automatically leading toward the Dance of the Dragons, which if you look at, like, for instance, I mean, my sort of point of view is looking at the way that Martin has written Fire and Blood as him mimicking some of these universal chronicles, particularly kind of the 16th century ones that got turned into Shakespeare's plays, because those are the ones that it's easier to access. You're not going to try and find like Gerald of Wales or something like that. You're going to look for something like Holinshed or Hall, like one of the ones that's relatively accessible through Shakespeare.
Mhm.
So these sources are compiled. I actually wrote a short kind of piece on this on my blog last week when they were doing right after The King in the Narrow Sea, because that was kind of the bit of Fire and Blood that I found most interesting, where you get all of these different versions of what happened between Damon, Rhaenyra, and Criston Cole, and Fire and Blood does not specify which one actually happened.
Yeah.
And the show also kind of melds all of them together so well. And is still incredibly ambiguous about why people are doing what they're doing. Like, we get what happened, but we still don't entirely know why.
Yeah.
And so when you look at kind of that period between, I think, 120 and 129, when the Dance of the Dragon starts, they're trying to shape that narrative as kind of constant upward action moving into this huge conflagration that's going to happen in 129, when in the reality may have been like everyone working as normal and then punctuated by these moments of violence.
I think that's kind of how I see it, for sure. I think what's
I don't think it was 10 years of constant fighting.
Yeah, right. That would be silly. In fact, in the wiki, there's a timeline page where it kind of scores through every year, but there's also certain years have their own entry where some are just summarized within this large timeline piece. The year, it goes from the year 111 to the year 120, and then the year 126, because 112 and 119, there's really just a few births and deaths and a few things like that. So that's kind of probably what they were thinking when they were like, if we need to do a time jump, this seems like the right time for it. But we can really see how this is the domino effect here. The kids are going to be training together. Aemon's going to call one of them strong or something like that's going to cause it to come to a head. Harwin's going to freak out. He's going to make it obvious that he cares more than someone who shouldn't be their father. He's not like, why does this man care so much? And then that's going to cause his father to talk to him. That's going to cause Viserys to talk to him. Rhaenyra is going to be like, okay, we're going to have to leave. And that's when Rhaenyra takes herself to Dragonstone and leaves. Yeah. We have shots on this episode of Jace getting a dragon. So you can really follow that through. They decide to leave King's Landing. Jace is like, oh, we're on Dragonstone now. And Rhaenyra's like, hey, my kids can acquire dragons. That will prove they're Targaryens, right? That's to put back this talk of Strongs. Like, well, if they can tame dragons, then that'll really prove who they really are. So it's actually almost straightforward in that regard when you look at how these dominoes will fall. Of course, that's going to take Rhaenyra away from King's Landing, what we were just talking about, being around the people, being prepared to rule. This small council scene will probably be a brief moment of her participating in the rule before things come to a head, and then she leaves for Dragonstone.
A brief moment for us, the viewer, but not a brief moment for her.
You're right.
She's been there for 10 years.
You're totally right. Yeah, it won't actually be a brief moment. Just a brief glimpse of what was a long, long time. Real quick, let me run through the rest of the small council, and we'll need to do a little halfway break here. We're covering a lot, but we're eating up time pretty quickly too. Lionel is hand now, as we saw. That was last episode. Alicent now seems to be sitting at the small council somewhat regularly. She maybe even has her father's trackball there. Yeah,
it does seem like the Hightower ball.
Yeah, Lyman Beesbury is still there. He's old, but still around. Or I think maybe Orwyle has replaced Melos. It's not clear, but the voice sounds different. There's like two different new voices, I think, and that makes sense because one of them could be the new Master of Laws. There should be a new Master of Laws now that Lionel was promoted. That could be Ironrod, Jasper Wiles. I don't suppose they're gonna bother with multiple Masters of Laws here, so probably just go straight to him. And then Tyland also could be one of the speakers. I admit I don't know his voice that well yet. So Lionel, Alicent, Lyman, Orwyle or Melos, new Master Laws, probably Jasper Wild and Tyland, and sometimes Rhaenyra until she apparently leaves. Yeah. But we'll leave that for now. I don't suppose we need to say much about it. It's just a thing to set up what we're going to be seeing. Let's talk briefly about what they actually say about the stepstones. Some of the conflict is set up by Alicent blaming Damon for not defending it, and then Rhaenyra saying we should have defended it. And it's just a very straightforward, like, we disagree on this, and surely there's lots of other things they disagree on. Because Damon, hey, he gave his crown to Viserys and said, hey, these I conquered them for you, so they should have been part of the kingdom. That's her point, I guess. Off page, a bunch of kings have followed Damon as king of the Narrow Sea. I have no idea how they're going to handle that in the show. I suspect it will be changed, but we'll see about that. Any comments on that, Kavita?
I would say, one of the interesting things is, yes, Damon has kind of relinquished control of the stepstones, but also we had that line about Corlys supposedly taking control of the stepstones.
That's a good point.
So maybe the reason that Alicent is blaming Damon is she is also blaming Corlys, and because Rhaenyra is kind of the representative of the Velaryon faction as well as herself.
Good point.
Because I think we're starting to get really the battle lines drawn. We've got Alicent representing the Reach, representing Old Town, representing those entrenched interests. And then on the flip side, we have Rhaenyra representing Corlys, representing Targaryens, Velaryons, kind of this push kind of in an eastward direction, maybe. Where trying to make alliances with the Free Cities is actually a thing. Because if you look at the way that people have talked about the Free Cities before, it's like people haven't really been it's not really a thing to ally between Westerosi houses and the Free Cities before this. It's not really been something that people have been doing. But it does seem to be something that Targaryens do.
True.
So that does seem to separate them. But I think partly because of this whole Valyrian heritage, the fact that they have this deeper connection to Essos than a lot of these other families. So they're more open to that idea. Whereas the other families, let's be real, there's a lot of xenophobia.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Another known change is Harold Westerling. He, in book canon, dies during the 10-year jump. That represents the show 10-year jump. But he doesn't here. We know he's still alive. We see him in the dagger scene that's probably next episode. Or maybe episode 8, not sure.
Yeah,
but
the
either way,
eye for an eye scene.
Yeah, the eye for an eye scene. He's standing there, so he's still around. So his death will make Criston Cole Lord Commander, though. So it's going to be a big deal when it happens. So they may have decided to move it for some particular reason, or just move it for logistical reasons. It's a little bit of a bummer because Harold Westerling, that actor, is he's a great dude.
Yeah, I'm really hoping we
had a big
get.
role.
I really like to get a scene with Harold and Criston in conversation. I would really like to get Harold's take on what's gone down.
I have a rather horrible idea, which
really?
I hope is not what they're going to do. I wondered if they would end up having some kind of conflict between Criston and Harold after Viserys dies. And that's how Criston becomes Lord Commander.
Interesting.
Just because in the book, of course, it's completely unrelated. It even happens before his fallout with Rhaenyra.
Yeah, that's true.
He's already the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard when
fast.
they have their falling out in Fire and Blood. At least that's my recollection. I feel like it's sort of like it happens in 112, and the falling out between him and Rhaenyra is sort of 113, 114. It's right before she gets married. And so, like, because they haven't done it that way, and because, of course, they have Graham McTavish, so they want to keep him around as long as possible, that might be how they do it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, he might get killed. Yeah,
Well,
he
might get offed.
Yeah, he might get offed. Like, especially if we have this like the Green Council. Like, it might be a bloodbath. We might
it might be him instead of Beesbury.
Yeah. And in addition to, he might try to defend Beesbury, and he has to take them both. Yeah, absolutely.
Because Beesbury does need to die, I think, to set up the difficulty in the Reach that indirectly gets Criston killed himself. If the Reach army wasn't delayed getting north, then he might have linked up with them and not been killed at the Butcher's Ball. But that's a what if. Either way, yeah, I agree. That's an interesting possibility that could set that up that way. Do you have any... Oh, real quick, Callista Cross says, just popping in again, are y'all excited or intrigued about the actor switch? I'm intrigued. I'm not... It's hard to be excited because I miss Millie and Emily, and I don't know how good Olivia and Emma are yet. I'm sure they're great. Like, I just haven't seen them do it yet. So it's just we're in that middle point where it's like, I'm sure they're going to be great, but since I haven't felt it yet, it hasn't washed over me personally yet. I'm like, I'm still just feeling the loss of Millie and Emily. Millie. What about you?
I was saying, I was appreciating, Aziz pointed out that he kept seeing articles that were like saying goodbye to Millie's Alcock as Rhaenyra, and people who aren't watching House of the Dragon probably like take a moment where they're like, she died?
She died?
Yeah, they kill her? Whoa. Yeah, that's probably what they think. You're right. They don't read actor swap if they're just looking at headlines or whatever. Yeah.
No, they're probably like, oh my God, they just killed their main characters.
It's like, oh, it's Ned Stark.
I mean, it's very
again.
Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, like they killed the Dany in season 1 this time. That's way different than waiting until season 8. Because I'm sure anyone who's paying casual attention has seen those like comparisons of what they look like. Yeah.
Oh yeah. and their hair and they look similar and just
Yeah. Definitely. So I want to ask you this: what about what's an equivalent that you see from the Kingsguard? Like one of the big topics of discussion we had last week was not just the relationship between Criston and Rhaenyra and where to assign blame and responsibility, but like how does he get away with what he did? And maybe you can frame that in terms of like personal guard of a king. They probably have some leeway, don't they? But maybe some other examples that I'm not aware of. What comes to mind for you when you think of the Kingsguard?
Honestly, the closest equivalent I can think of has nothing to do with royalty. It's the Swiss Guard in the Vatican.
Interesting. Okay.
Because there you have a very specific force that is very small, extremely selective, extremely secretive. These guys do not talk about anything. They're not supposed to.
Like the Swiss banks.
It's very much like the Secret Service. It always has been. And the part of the reason why, the reason why the Swiss Guard exist in the first place is because way back when, the Pope was constantly warring with the other Roman noble families for power in Rome. And what the Pope wanted was a completely neutral set of guards who would be loyal only to the papacy, would not be pulled from the noble families, would not have any other kinds of alliances. And Switzerland at the time was known for producing very good spearmen. So the reason that the Swiss, so if you look at, if you even Google just the picture of the Swiss Guard, they're still wearing these ridiculous kind of 16th century-esque looking uniforms, and they have a giant pike. Yeah, they have giant pikes. And so the Swiss Guard are probably the closest equivalent I can think of to the Kingsguard, because, I mean, kings had kind of their own royal guard and everything, but it's not the same level of kind of devotion or perceived devotion, I guess. Because it's because it's this it's not just about being a guard. It's not just about guarding the king. It's not just about being a bodyguard. It's about keeping the king's secrets. It's about being completely unquestioningly loyal. And that to me smacks more of religion than it does of political power.
Interesting.
Or you can look at, I think the example that you guys gave of the Secret Service is almost as good, even though it's a modern example. I think what George is doing is he's kind of melding knightly orders like the Templars or the Hospitallers, which had nothing to do with being bodyguards, to something like the Swiss Guard, which is a very sort of small, select, supposedly like the best of the best of the best kind of deal. And of course, the Knights of the Round Table, which are their own kind of separate thing. So yeah, I mean, the Kingsguard are basically the Secret Service. Their role is to protect the royal family, specifically the king, in every possible way, which includes protecting their reputation, which is part of how I think Criston gets away with what he does. I think that Alicent in particular is going to close ranks. I feel like this is where that rumor about Joffrey is going to come out. I feel like this is where the rumors about Laenor and Joffrey are going to come from. Yeah. Where the official story is probably going to be something like, this guy made scandalous statements about the princess. Criston Cole was so loyal to his princess, to his precious princess, that he just went to town and beat him to death. Oops. There's a lot of ways should not have done that. Oh. And I think that your comments about sort of Corlys and Rhaenys choosing to keep this quiet, not like Laenor probably wanted to pursue wrong. Laenor was probably like, you got to get rid of this guy. I don't want him anywhere near my family. Yeah. And that might also, I'm sure he wanted Criston just gone. Yeah. But his parents, especially Corlys, who has this hang up about his son's sexuality, probably just said, you know what? It's probably for the best that your boyfriend is gone. It sucks. We're really sorry. I mean, I don't think Rhaenys would do that. I could, unfortunately, much as I love Corlys, and I do, based on the way that we've seen him talk about Laenor and his sexuality, I could see him doing that.
Yeah.
And he's
It's
ambitious.
like, this is for the best of the family. This is for the best for your family. You really need to just kind of get over this guy.
A little paternalistic, or a lot paternalistic, perhaps. Yeah, it's what's I know what's best.
Very.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what's best. I'm in charge. This is how we're doing it. And Alicent probably comes out very strongly in Criston's favor.
Yes.
And
that's
Rhaenyra
crucial.
may or may not know what's going on. Like, I don't know how much anyone is going to tell her. Criston sure as hell isn't going to tell her anything. Alicent isn't going to tell her anything.
Yeah.
So her only source of information is going to be Viserys. And we don't know how much he knows.
Yep.
So it may be that that Criston gets away with it primarily because of Alicent's influence, but also because Viserys is just like, I'm
lenient.
going based on what my wife tells me.
It's very similar to Cersei and Robert. Yeah, just Cersei champions Jaime and says Jaime's fine, you got to keep him, and yeah, Jaime's a Lannister, but it's if Jaime wasn't a Lannister and Cersei still championed him, it would probably still have had the same result. She's like, she's got her husband's ear, and Robert's like, I can't be bothered, just take the easy way out. Yeah, so Viserys is very similar.
And especially if she spins it as like he's tremendously loyal and he did not want rumors about your daughter to go spreading at her wedding.
And she's partly right. He is now tremendously loyal to Alicent. She saved him twice or three times, arguably, if you count the getting him off of consequences as the third time, whereas the first one was not killing him for his admission. The second one was saving him from suicide, and now this. So yeah, you would think he'd be loyal to her.
I think he's more than loyal to her. I think that it's going to be like a creepy sort of like quasi-religious, like, you saved me from death, I will defend you and your children
saved my
to
soul.
the death.
That kind of thing.
I think it's gonna. I think when we encounter Criston and Alicent again, it's gonna be like super super creepy.
Yeah, I think prepare for Criston to be a very different person. Like, he was already. People who had read Fire and Blood kind of knew what direction he was going, but I think the portrayal is going to shift. I think ready for Fabian Frankel to kick into a different gear here. Yeah.
I mean, he said it at the very beginning, like very early on. He's like, "Oh, Criston's a thug."
He's not. He wasn't missing.
It's like,
words.
oh no! As soon as he said that, I was like, "Oh my god!"
Thug. Whoa, yeah, that's bad.
It's like, whoa.
Yes,
I mean, on the one hand, I'm like, "Yay, you know the character," but wow,
it's gonna be intense. Yeah, and it makes sense. Yeah, this is a guy who, and you also could see this another way, having gotten away with all that. It might make him feel even more untouchable. He's like, oh, and also might make him feel, especially if he goes more religious about it, that he was destined to do that, or like the gods were on his side. So he feels, he's going to have even more like, I'm a good guy. Like, self-righteousness will be all through him.
Yeah, self-righteousness. And I think this is where we're going to start seeing the divide forming in the Kingsguard, which is partly why I wonder what they're going to do with Harold Westerling, because
Eric and Ark have to split.
Eric and Arik have to split. We haven't really encountered the two of them. The only two Kingsguard knights that we have had any real contact with are Harold Westerling and Criston.
Besides Ryan, but he's dead.
Yeah. Besides Ryan Redwine, who was only really kind of there.
Yeah, he just kind of stood there. Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting, because here's where we're going to start seeing like the divide that happens within the Kingsguard as well, because half of them are going to support Rhaenyra and half of them are going to support Aegon.
True.
And I feel like that might partly be where we get this, where we get the shift between Harold Westerling and Criston Cole. Maybe that's going to be connected to that, and we're going to start seeing other members of the Kingsguard start to get more prominent.
Very good take. Yeah, I hadn't really given much thought to how this will play out within the Kingsguard, in part because of what you said. It hasn't been that prominent other than these two characters, and frankly, Harold Westerling hasn't even been that prominent. So
I wonder,
there's an opportunity for that.
Yeah, I feel like there's an opportunity. Like, Criston could be part of the conflict within the Kingsguard. It might not be as much about which king or queen to support, but I don't want to side with Lord Commander Criston.
And a lot of it's going to be played out by this next topic. But first, we have a question here. Shannon 0893 says, "What if we get a scene of Criston reading his White Book entry after Harold's death as a way to give the explanation for why he didn't get punished for killing King?"
I really like that idea.
That makes sense.
You know, like that. I can't.
That could be interesting.
It's a good way to do a flashback. The White Book is a good vehicle for that.
Yeah, because Harold had to write what Criston has done in there. So yeah.
And we do know that Criston wrote in the White Book. I mean, that's I tweeted yesterday that it's funny how reading A Song of Ice and Fire right now is a total spoiler for the House of the Dragon. You get Dany talking about Viserys right away. You get the Dance of the Dragons mentioned, and Bran too. Like Rhyme Red Wine is mentioned that early too, and the Kingmaker Criston Cole's mentioned several times. Yeah, so yeah, you don't want to actually. When I say Valar Rereadus right now, it comes with a caveat. Yeah, watch out for spoilers. Okay, so Curtis Frank says, brief moment for her, same with Damon getting exiled each episode and strolling back in the next. It's actually a pretty long exile, even though short for watch time. That's a good point. That's
people
true.
are going to laugh about the idea of like, oh, Damon was exiled and he just came right back. But,
Again.
But each of these times was like not actually a day. He was gone for a significant period of time.
That's true.
We just can't tell.
Yeah. So something that will fuel Criston even more in his righteousness and Alicent will be the Strong situation. The boys, they'll be like, okay, so they're the ones carrying on the rightful and always / keeping a bastard from inheriting. They can really cast themselves as the good guys here, even though we know better.
Yep.
So we get to the training yard where it looks like a lot of it's going to happen. Does it kind of look like Harwin's looking at his cell phone right now? He's like checking his messages. He's like, let me see what's going on here. I'm bored right now. But so there's a scene where Lionel...
He's a dad at the playground. That's what he's doing. He's a dad at the playground.
It really seems like Criston is taking on like a fatherly figure for Alicent's sons as Viserys has like...
Yeah.
Not is at a distance because he's sick, but you see Criston is the one training them. He's the one defending them.
Yeah
I feel like we're going to end up with a very close relationship between Criston and Alicent. I don't think it's going to be in any way romantic.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think that it's going to be sort of the two of them in loco parentis, kind of raising these kids together, because we get the impression that Viserys is just ill.
Yeah.
Like these kids may not even know their dad.
Yeah,
I believe Viserys is watching them.
Yeah, we see this shot here of him and Lionel watching them
and Lionel
together.
is probably going to freak because Harwin's going to freak, and he's going to be like, uh-oh, my son has just kind of given up the game there. We have a line where Alicent says, to have one child like that is a mistake. To have 3 is an insult. And Viserys seemingly responds. Later in the trailer, these things are kind of mixed up, but I feel like this is the immediate reaction. Viserys says, the consequences of an allegation such as the one you toy at would be dire. And you can see how dire it is. I mean, look at what's happening here. Harwin punches Criston Cole. The other Kingsguard pull him off. I guess it takes both of them because he's so strong. And this, like I said earlier, is going to lead to him being just told to leave court to kind of brush this under the rug. That's Lionel saying people have eyes is probably him chastising Harwin for like, look, son, when you take it that personally with these kids that aren't supposed to be your kids, people are going to notice. It's like kind of obvious. And then you have we'll come back to this, but the big voiceover is Larys Strong saying, the stuff about children and how a father's compromised by his son's actions. Very much repeating Otto's situation, except that we don't know that Lionel pushed Harwin towards this. Still, it ends up in a similar place where the protector is compromised. The Hand of the King is compromised because of his family is now part of the royal family. Although in this case it's under wraps, so it's a little more complicated. So that's a question I have for you, Kavita. What are some examples that come to mind for you and how do they play out in the real world when you have 2 sets of kids from the same king that are living together with different mothers, and they're both sort of jockeying for position, both with their father at court and of course for the throne? Are there any strong examples that come to mind, or anything you can say about this kind of situation from the real world?
Well, I mean, we don't. The closest example I can think of is not a medieval one. It's Henry VIII.
Oh, okay.
So it's early modern 16th century. And of course, he had 6 wives.
Yeah.
3 of them had children. And each one had 1 child. So we had Princess Mary, who was his oldest child, born from Catherine of Aragon. And she was Henry VIII's first wife. She was the one that he was married to for the longest. She was the only one who was not at any point, like, before everything went down, like there was no question about her. She was the daughter of the king and queen of Spain. She was a match that no one had any problems with, except for that whole thing where she was previously married to his brother, but they talked to the church about that and decided it was fine, except later on when it wasn't. So he had Princess Mary first. And then, of course, as everybody knows, he divorced Catherine of Aragon, started his own church in order to marry Anne Boleyn, who then had a daughter. And he decided that was not acceptable for him. So he had Anne Boleyn executed and married Jane Seymour, who finally gave him the son that he so desperately wanted. They really do seem to be giving Viserys, like, I get a lot of Henry VIII parallels from Viserys here, especially in those early episodes where he was so obsessed with having a male heir. Like Rhaenyra, I was getting such Princess Mary parallels from Rhaenyra, this girl who has been, like, she's been there the whole time. She's been watching the whole time. She has seen all of these things happen. And she knows that no matter what, she is never, ever going to be good enough for her dad. And it's so sad. And that is very much like always the way that I have seen Mary Tudor, especially in her younger years, just this poor kid who, through absolutely no fault of her own, ended up becoming a pawn in these awful political games, and it just completely wrecked her life. So we have Princess Mary, Princess Elizabeth, and Prince Edward, and it was contentious raising the three of them. Initially they had three separate households because, of course, the succession was very hinky. As soon as Edward was born, Henry VIII said, okay, I have a son. He is my heir. End of story. Okay, there are these girls, but we will figure out what to do with them later. And Edward gets older, and it is only when Edward is he is a child when his dad dies. And so Edward becomes king. And as soon as he becomes king, everyone has to ask, okay, well, who's going to be king after you if something happens to you? Because Edward was also very sickly. He was constantly ill. And he had, as far as we are aware, the relationship between the three siblings was cordial, I guess. It's really, Mary was much, much older than both of the other two. And Elizabeth and Edward were within a couple of years of each other. They were only like 3 or 4 years apart. And the two of them shared the fact that they were Protestant as well, whereas Mary was very, 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 very Catholic. And so we get the sense that Edward and Elizabeth kind of got along, but also Edward was like, nobody wanted to talk about Elizabeth's mom. Elizabeth's mom is like the Bruno of this equation. Nobody wants to talk about her. And yeah, I'm sorry. My daughter's obsessed with Encanto. So yeah, like it's really you can have households where three children from three different mothers are raised together. There was a period during Henry VIII's the later part of his reign when all of his children were at court and they were all mostly getting along. And at least on the surface, everything seemed to be fine, but no one ever actually believed it was fine. So I think the answer to the question, the kind of short version, I suppose, since I've already rambled a bunch, the answer to the question is that it was always fraught. It was always hard. And it always depended on how well the king had been about either raising his children together, because there are kings who raised multiple families together and raised the children to support each other and set things up so that, okay, this kid is the heir. All of you are going to support him. And sometimes that worked. There were ways to get that to work. Yeah. But you had to really kind of be very strong about it, and that's not who Viserys is.
He is the opposite of that, yeah. This guy just lets things happen.
Yeah, no, it does.
Yeah, Henry VIII made a lot of really terrible decisions. Yeah. And he was capricious the way that Viserys is. He would change his mind on a dime, but he also was not a people pleaser the same way, I don't think.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Huh. Right on. Very good. That's a great example. Okay, so
I'm just curious, just a shout out. I have to shout it out because people brought it up in the chat. Once you brought up Henry VIII, I want to make sure, Kavita, that you have seen Six, the musical about Henry VIII, and if you have or have not, there is in a Song of Ice and Fire version done by performed at Ice and Fire Con, Queen's the musical, and so shout out to that.
Oh, I need to watch. Like I have listened to the songs like here and there, but I need to just sit down and listen to all of them together.
I was curious
It's
on your
my
take
list.
on it. Yeah, for sure.
It is on my list. I desperately want to see it. I have not had the chance to.
Especially because you
mentioned a bunch of my
Tinder.
Friends have seen it.
Yeah.
My sister has seen it. Like people keep telling me you need to watch this. I'm like, I know, but I'm in Boston.
Yeah,
so.
I watched a YouTube video of it after I watched the Song of Ice and Fire take. I was like, well, I want to see what this was inspired by, so I watched a recording of it, which is not as good as seeing it live. But anyways.
Okay, let's talk about Larys and Alicent. It's our last major topic.
And
these are two.
We'll talk about Helaena in here too, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I care about is talking about Helaena. I'm like, we'll get there.
Our bug girl.
I know. But Larys and Alicent, our plant boy, I guess.
Our plant boy.
Plant boy.
The plant that he drew
is
her
a
attention
plant.
to is now in her chambers. So she is taken to it and apparently taken to him. And I don't mean romantically. I just mean as an
maybe
ally.
to some people.
I guess it's possible, but I don't.
No,
I don't think Alicent's sleeping with
I don't think she is.
Like,
I don't think she is.
Yeah,
that defines her character.
Clear.
She's about duty. That's one of the things she resents about Rhaenyra is that, and especially about this situation with Laenor, is that she did her duty and had kids with a man that she was not attracted to. But Laenor and Rhaenyra can't do what needs doing on their end, so I think she resents that. Which
she's not wrong to resent that. She's done her duty, and they are not doing their duty. I agree with Alicent.
Kind of a fair
here.
point. Yeah,
I do. I don't agree with how she's addressing it, but I agree with the idea.
Yeah, I at least kind of see why she would be bitter about that.
Yeah, like the one thing that I have always, the parallel I have always seen for Rhaenyra, and I have seen this ever since I first read the Princess and the Queen, was the figure of Lucrezia Borgia. And part of the reason why is because of her and Damon. There's that very kind of uncomfortable relationship between those two. Like, will they, won't they, are they, aren't they? The rumors are swirling around them. It's incestuous. It's weird. It's all of these things. And also the other thing is the Strong situation. There were all kinds of rumors about how many secret children Lucrezia Borgia actually had. The only one that we are fairly sure about was one named Giovanni, who was officially registered as her dad's child, but the suspicion is that he was possibly Lucrezia's. And there's there's no record of like what he looked like or anything like that, but he was referred to as the Roman infant, the infans Romanus. And people were just like, yeah, he's a Borgia, he's a papal kid, but we don't know whose kid he is. Is he the Pope's? Is he Cesare's? Is he Juan's? Is he Lucrezia's? We don't know. But someone in that Pope's family, which for the record, he is not supposed to have in the first place. Somebody in the Pope's family has a kid. We don't know which one, but one of them definitely did. So I am reminded very much of Lucrezia Borgia, who is such a fascinating and controversial figure because so many things were said about her and none of them can be conclusively proven.
Wow.
We don't even know what she looked like because half of the portraits that are supposedly of her may not actually be of her. We don't know. The only one that we can be completely sure of is there's one in the Vatican apartments in Rome called the Disputation of St. Catherine. That one we know is her. But and it was her when she was maybe 13 years old. But other than that, we have no idea. And she is this figure who is credited with having poisoned people, having had tons and tons of affairs, having slept with her brother, having slept with her father, having had an affair with one of the most famous poets of the Italian Renaissance, Pietro Bembo. having sort of being married to this one duke who had syphilis, like all of this stuff, all of these racy things that we hear about her. And we do not know if any of them are true. Like half of them have no basis in any kind of like contemporary facts. And Rhaenyra, the way that she's written, especially with all of these rumors swirling around her, I am so reminded of Lucrezia Borgia.
Nice. Yeah. Do you think some of them apply to Alicent too? I mean, Alicent isn't as similar to Lucrezia, but maybe some of the sources, the way they say things about her, you wonder if there's some of that similar bias, maybe to a lesser degree.
Yeah.
There's just not as
absolutely.
many scandals around her, I guess, for one thing.
No, Alicent is the opposite of scandalous, but what we get from her is because of all these rumors swirling around Rhaenyra, Alicent kind of gets pulled into it in a lot of ways. It's like, oh, Rhaenyra is terrible, but look at how wonderful Alicent is in comparison, is kind of what we end up getting.
Yeah.
Like a lot of that fat phobic nonsense about like, oh, Rhaenyra lost her looks by the age of 20, but Alicent was still looking great after having all these kids.
Yeah.
Rockin' bud.
Like, how is that in the history? How is that historically relevant?
How is that? Yeah. How is that relevant?
I'm writing a list of all the MILFs in Westeros, and he's like, Alicent number 1. Rhaenyra's just like 20th.
Yeah, you got these academics who have grew up in a school and never left it. They probably haven't had much of a dating life, so they think about these things.
I mean, Meisters are not supposed to date, too.
Yeah.
Like, Meisters are also one of those celibate orders, so no wonder they're obsessed with Rhaenyra's sex life. They have nothing going on in their own.
Yeah, it's all very frivolous to them, and they have no idea what they're talking about. Yeah. So interestingly, Alicent expresses in a brief moment of scene that was released ahead of time, she's basically like, yeah, I want my father back as hand because he's biased for me. She's like, I'm just going to come out and say it. You know, he's on my side. That's why I want him here. Which we were really wondering, and people have been wondering about this since Fire and Blood came out. Is Larys the one that kills Lionel and Harwin to get his own lordship? And in this scene, this quote where he says, "What are children but a weakness? Through them you imagine you will persist forever, but for them you surrender what you should not." It really sounds like a guy who's about to kill his own father, or at least could be, given that we know his father's about to die. So, and he says, "A father compromised my acts of a son." So you wonder, I mean, you could definitely see why someone else would want to kill Harwin and Lionel to keep this secret.
Yeah.
So it's a great mystery.
I go back and forth, Aziz. On our Wednesday stream, I felt like I felt convinced that maybe it was Larys, and then I thought about it more, and I'm like, I don't think it was Larys after all. But I really vacillate back and forth on whether I think Larys was both involved or the impetus for it, because those are two different things. Like, him just being involved and agreeing to it are different from him coming up with the idea or deciding to do it.
And Alicent wants her dad back there, which would mean the removal of Lionel. But how does Larys know that killing Lionel will bring back Otto? That's like step 1, but step 2 is completely separate.
It kind of brings me to it's funny enough, because there was Viserys when he was all lost in his paranoia, and he's thinking about Balon being killed and how Otto then was hanged within 5 days later. Otto wouldn't have known either, but it's worked out the same.
And it's the same kind of problem where you can't have full trust in him, and it's like, well, no, I'm not sure about that. I'm not so sure I can trust you anymore, even though I have trusted you to this point. Now you're compromised.
I guess we've talked about it a bunch. Kavita, where do you land on Larys' involvement? It's a bit it could go a lot of ways, I think, but do you have a thing you think, and do you have a thing you want? Like, 'cause those are different sometimes.
I know what I want. My pet theory is one that is completely out of left field. I love it for a variety of reasons. And this is that, so my thought is that Larys was involved with the murder of his dad and Harwin. And that there were a variety of reasons behind this, at least one of which was that Harwin was being too bold. He was compromised. And it was starting to become too dangerous for the Strongs. Like, if having your kids that close to the throne puts a target on your back. And also, I think that Larys just didn't approve of it. I feel like he is very much kind of falling into, like, we already see him sympathetic to Alicent.
He's taking the green side, for whatever reason.
Yeah, he's already leaning towards the Greens because he has that comment he makes to Alicent about how much he misses Otto, how much he thinks Otto was doing the right thing, how he believes that Otto was a good hand.
Yeah.
And this is in spite of the fact that his dad is the one who replaces Otto.
Yeah.
So to have him say that, I think, is very clearly setting up that he is going to at least start this fight on the green side.
Yeah. For whatever reason, I totally agree. I don't know that we understand his motivations, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that he's necessarily the driving force behind them getting killed. I feel that he might, I think he has to be involved. I feel like that's part of the reason the way that it happens and the way that it happens so smoothly is because he's involved. But I think he's involved. And I think my pet theory starts actually after the death of Lionel and Harwin. And it is that before Otto gets reinstated, Viserys, and there's a throwaway line in Fire and Blood, Viserys considered making Rhaenyra his hand. Like it's a throwaway mention. Yeah. It is like half a sentence. Viserys, some say Viserys did this, but no, he decided to bring back Otto Hightower. And I seized on that first half of that line and went, oh my God, what if he did? And so you think about the ramifications of that. You think, okay, Rhaenyra has just lost her husband. She has just lost Laena. Damon has just lost Laena. Like, both of the Velaryon siblings are dead. They both died within weeks of each other. We've had that awful incident with Lucerys and Aemond. And Rhaenyra has not yet gotten together with Damon, so far as we know.
Right, so she hasn't upset her father with that one.
She has not. Yeah. And I feel that Viserys considers making Rhaenyra his hand, decides not to for some reason, whether that reason is Alicent, Larys, both. Whoever, both. Someone convinces him not to. He reinstates Otto as hand. That makes Alicent, Larys, and the Greens happy. Rhaenyra is furious about this and goes and marries Damon.
This could be part of why she leaves. Maybe it's related to separating their children.
I think it's part of her departure. Yeah. I think it's part of why I think the main reason she marries Damon is because Viserys passes her over.
Interesting.
And chooses Otto Hightower.
Interesting. That definitely fits.
And so she sees Damon as a way to shore up her own power.
Right on. Okay, yeah, that works. I mean, it's referring back to Larys, I think that also makes a lot of sense because if he's taking the side of the Greens, he sees his father taking the side of the Blacks, and his brother is fully involved with their children.
Oh, yeah. His brother is like straight up in the middle of the nonsense.
Yeah. And it's super ironic.
And his brother...
Because he thinks
and
his
brother
smart.
Is also he's also interfering in the succession.
Yeah,
like Harwin is literally committing treason by sleeping with the queen, like by sleeping with the heir to the throne.
Exactly what Criston Cole did.
Depending on how, like I look at it and I go, well, the claim to the throne derives through Rhaenyra, therefore it doesn't matter who the father is, but also everyone cares.
Yeah, everyone does care, and that does matter.
And especially Alicent is going to care, and she is going to talk about how much she cares to everybody who will listen.
Yeah. It's super ironic that Larys is like, I'm the smart one. I believe we should be on the green side, and it's not gonna work out for him. And he's gonna switch. He's gonna try to switch to the Blacks at the end, and it will almost work. But Cregan's gonna be like, no, definitely not you. Not even the Sea Snake gets away with this. Like he's like, none of y'all, anyone who switched sides at any point.
But yeah, like whatever it is, though, I mean, Alice Rivers is definitely involved in the fire. She is absolutely, like, I absolutely 100% believe Alice Rivers is involved.
That's a great idea.
I don't know how, but like she's their I feel like she's their person on the ground. Like she's their person. Like she's the only person who's there at Harrenhal.
Yeah, someone has to do it. Yeah, Larys isn't setting that fire himself.
Yeah, because Larys isn't there.
Yeah, I wonder if that's something we could find out after the fact. Because I don't think we'll see Alice this season.
No, I don't think we will.
So like, would that be one of those things that you just as a viewer we can extrapolate and be like, well, Alice was there and we know that she would have been, or will that be the sort of thing where Alice has a conversation with Larys or with someone where
and then later on.
And then you find out this information.
We actually do get a shot of the
a great
Harrenhal
call.
fire and then
Yeah.
a shot of the aftermath where they're carrying out a body and there's smokes and flames around and wearing.
Yeah.
It's funny because the soldiers are wearing green. They don't have sigils, but I really can't
Maybe they're
imagine this
making
being something
sure
else.
that everyone is dead.
Yeah, yeah. So there you go. There's the shot. Shay's got it on screen now. Yeah. So definitely wonder about that.
Smoky out there. It looks like.
Let's talk briefly about Mushroom, Kavita, because you've got a fun note here. In the bit about Larys and talking about later in Fire and Blood, he just is more and more brazen with what he says he'll do. Larys is like, yeah, we can just ally with the Sea Snake and then kill him later once he does what we need. He's very later in Fire and Blood during the war. He's very brazen with his suggestions on how to betray people. He's like, yeah, King, just pretend to be on his side, then we can do whatever we want later. But he's like, a betrothal isn't a marriage. We can always break it later. This is just a move. It's not a commitment. So he's
taking Machiavelli too far.
Yeah, he goes
That's
full
what he's
blown. Yeah,
doing.
and this stage he's keeping that all under wraps. Later he breaks out with it. But the line from Mushroom is, a man who gathers whispers can spread them just as well, referring to his being a rumor monger as well as a rumor collector. And it's his rumor mongering that might do more damage, probably does. And so we're going to have a lot of opportunities throughout the rest of the run of the show to be like, did Larys do that? And you have this great idea that even Mushroom is a facade of sorts. This is cool. Go ahead and tell people about this one.
So this is like just a half-baked idea that I was thinking about when I was listening to the half-season recap episode in the car the other day, because I'd been wondering it for a long time. Because Mushroom is like, I can see who George has based it on. It's very much kind of Suetonius. That is the vibe that I get from Mushroom, because Suetonius is the Roman historian who spilled all of the tea about the later emperors. You want like Nero and Caligula and Claudius. Like, he is the main source for I Claudius, which is a source that George has talked about a bunch of times, including in the interview he did with you guys.
He loves I Claudius.
Yeah, he loves I Claudius. And the main contemporary source for I Claudius is The Lives of the Caesars by Suetonius. And Mushroom has a very Suetonius voice. Like, he always picks the most scandalous, the raciest, the sexiest interpretation of everything. Or the one that involves the most murder. So, like, yeah, especially if someone can be having sex and getting murdered at the same time, that's what Mushroom is into. So what I wondered, is Mushroom even real? The testimony of Mushroom only survives in a few supposedly scattered manuscripts. Gildane claims that he copied it into his text and then hasn't seen, like, most of them were burned by Baelor, so there's no original.
Mm-hmm.
Mushroom is very rarely mentioned. Like, is he ever mentioned in anybody else's accounts? I don't think he is. I think we only ever get Mushroom talking about himself. No one else mentions him. So what I wonder is Mushroom even a real person, or is Mushroom a pen name? And is this actually written by somebody else?
I love it.
And there's actually there's a great source for the last couple of years of the Wars of the Roses that is supposedly called the second continuation of a monastic chronicle, but is very clearly written by a guy who was at the court. Like, the things that he knows and the things that he mentions are not something you would know if you were not physically in the court, watching stuff, being there for things. So we don't know who the guy is. There's a lot of speculation about who he might have been. No way of knowing for certain, but it is listed as a monastic chronicle. It was stored in a monastery. They did not find it until 300 years after the death of Richard III.
Oh.
So, like, this was a chronicle. This was a source that was not available to Shakespeare. This was a source that was not available to any of the 16th century chroniclers writing about Richard III. It only pops up much, much later. And it is one of those sources where a lot of the stuff he says, there's no corroboration for it. It's the only source that has this information. And so I wonder, Is mushroom even real?
That's awesome. Yeah.
I think that's a great concept that I honestly hadn't thought about before, but I really like the idea of someone being like, oh, I want to write about this stuff that I experienced or that I heard about, like a little picture of both, that they saw some stuff and then they didn't want to put their name to it. They didn't want that. So let's come up with a moniker, a pseudonym, and like if it's racial, I really like the idea.
Didn't George use that for one of the other in-world books? Like, isn't A Caution for Young Girls, isn't one of the suggestions that Caution for Young Girls was not written by Corian Wilde? So we already have the idea.
Right. That concept is there with that. Nice. Absolutely.
Very cool.
Oh, when I taught a graduate seminar actually on where we used Fire and Blood as one of the texts. Yeah. And nice. I actually had one of my students wrote the most amazing analysis of A Caution for Young Girls based entirely on what were provided in Fire and Blood. She talked like, here are like 4 different manuscript versions. Here are all the differences between them. Here's where they were found. Here's how they were put together. She created all of this stuff. It was such a great paper. Wow. I loved it so much.
You must have had so much fun with that.
Yeah.
I was so pleased. It was exactly what I wanted from the assignment. She also, this same student also wrote a fantastic piece on the murder of Jaehaera Targaryen.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So she's in there. Yeah.
She is.
My theory on Mushroom isn't nearly as cool as yours. It's just that the cameras aren't pointed down low enough. Like if they were to angle a little differently, you'd see him. He's actually been in every scene.
He's been there the whole time.
I would love to see that edit that someone makes.
Yeah, it's like the mushroom edit. Yeah, he's really
all there. You see is everyone's feet.
Yeah, his knees, lots of knees, and so a couple of
like the opposite of the Snyder cut.
Yeah, the mushroom cut.
Mushroom cut.
Oh, that's a different sort of thing. A mushroom cut.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of
mushroom cut. They have to only show on pay-per-view.
Yeah, you have to be on mushrooms to watch the mushroom cut. Yeah, that's it. Or to understand it, right? All right. Well, a couple of random thoughts before we say goodbye today. We've had a nice run.
Oh yeah.
But it's getting to be about that time. We're wondering how some of the green stuff will play out. Alicent, of course, is imparting on her son that he will be king. But here's Helaena, our first shot of Helaena. She is a bug girl.
You see right here.
She is.
I lightened and zoomed in on her box. She's got a box with like a scorpion and some beetles and like leaf insects. And in her hands there, she does have a giant millipede. People had wondered if it was like a snake or what, but yeah, a millipede. And so yeah, critter girl, Helaena, bug girl, which like, I mean, we hear that Jaehaera is a little different, a little odd, a little maybe neurodivergent. And so that's Helena's daughter, Jaehaera. So I feel like this is not them taking something from nothing. In other words, like we have, and this is something I said before, like we have nothing on Helena's personality really at all. So they really get to do what they want here. But I feel like the decision to do this with Helaena is actually like that. There is a lot of text that it's rooted in because of the Jaehaera thing and because of Helaena. For me, I'm like with her dragon being named Dreamfire, like that's who she, who she pairs with. I wonder how much Helena's having dreams. Like, is Helaena a dreamer? That's my thought. Is that Helaena is very haunted girl. Yeah. So that's what I think. And so I would be very curious if Helaena talks to her dad about this. If Helaena has a Viserys scene, like I'm so excited to see what they do with Helaena. I already was excited, and this is a good first start, right?
Yeah.
That is going to be heartbreaking. Helaena, I already just like, there are very few people on the green side that I like, but Helaena is like the one person I'm like, precious baby girl. She did nothing wrong ever.
Yeah. I think literally she did nothing wrong.
Yeah,
I don't know of a thing she did wrong.
Yeah, you're right.
No, she did nothing wrong. Poor Helaena. She doesn't deserve anything that happens to her.
And she's going to have to marry her brother. I wonder if they're going to start to talk about this or whether that'll be more of an episode 7 thing.
That's what Alicent's saying. She's like, put down the millipede. Stop being gross and marry your brother already.
Well, I'll be curious. I will be very, very curious to see how Alicent gets around her anti-incest.
Yes, me too.
Yes.
Because even in that scene, like the one scene in episode 4 where she was confronting Rhaenyra about the incest, about Damon, and that, like, Emily Carey, I cannot get over her in that
She's
scene.
so
She
good.
was so good.
Yeah.
And like her micro expressions and the disgust on her face, the way her lip twisted at that word sullied, I was just like, oh, this is everything.
Yeah. We talk about face acting. She has lip acting, particularly
Yeah.
the way her lips move
And
when she's upset.
that- That scene alone, it explained so much of what happened afterward.
Yeah.
Like, if you pay attention, like anyone who thinks that Alicent's heel turn was not foreshadowed in that scene was not watching
Oh,
that
yeah,
scene,
it was
because that scene,
very-
it was absolutely
Oh,
right
yeah.
there. And like, because it's almost like she's seeing Rhaenyra through completely new eyes now that she has this information about Damon. She's like, oh God, you really are like your uncle and not like your father.
Yeah.
Because yes, like Viserys and Aemma were cousins, but nobody seems to really have a problem with that. And at least, I mean, cousin marriage, like for marriage between first cousins was a thing. Like people, it wasn't encouraged. People preferred to avoid it where it was possible, but it was a thing that that royal families did.
Also the case for Ned
Yeah.
Stark right there,
His
cousin
parents,
marriage.
yeah.
Yeah, cousin marriage.
Yeah,
Like
because
it's
his
not
parents, yes.
Tywin and Joanna. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Tywin and
yeah,
Joanna.
Tywin
yeah.
and Joanna. Like it's all very normal, but the niece uncle thing, especially because you can tell, like even from the get-go, Alicent is never comfortable around Damon.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, she doesn't like it.
Damon is like, and I think she gets it from her dad. I think Otto, I think you were the one, you might, I don't remember, I heard it somewhere. Someone was like, Otto hated Damon on sight. And I think you guys were the ones who had the theory about Damon being like a snot-nosed kid.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it was a Joe Magician. We had someone on who was talking
Yeah,
about
someone
that.
was like,
Absolutely.
Damon is a snot-nosed kid
Yeah.
in the Red Keep harassing Otto because he would. Like, that's totally
Yeah.
Pushing
something
back
Damon
against
would
the
do.
authority
Yeah,
figure.
if you're an adult
Yeah.
who meets young Damon Targaryen, you probably don't like that kid. Like, probably
God,
very
no. And
few
especially-
adults liked him.
No, good point.
Very few. And I mean,
Maybe none.
and Otto is a Puritan. Like the
Yeah.
way that he's costumed, even from the get-go, he doesn't look medieval to me. He looks like Francis Walsingham. He looks like Robert Cecil. He looks like an Elizabethan Puritan.
Yeah, you're right. You're
Look,
absolutely right.
the facial
costuming,
hair,
yeah.
his outfits. He looks like a
Robert as
Puritan.
well.
Yeah.
Both
Yeah.
of them. They
All
got
he
their
needs is
big
the
like
hat.
religious symbols
Yeah.
in there. Yeah.
With their
And we
big
see
seven
some of
pointed
those big
stars,
hats and from other
everything.
people too. Like they did
Yeah.
clearly put that in the background of some of these scenes.
Yeah. Like it's I love
Yeah.
the mishmash of styles. Like obviously there's high medieval going on, but also there's like a bunch of Elizabethan stuff creeping in all around the edges, and I love it.
Well, so much of
But
the Byzantine
it is-
era too, as well.
Lena's necklace that she was wearing had the triple
Mhm.
kind of revert, kind of like Rhaenyra's necklace. It had
Oh
the
wait,
triple fold.
Yeah.
thing.
really? I got to pull that up because that is too funny to me. Because I'm just picturing that like Damon,
Like, Damon has a bunch of those
Yeah, no, that's this is a different necklace.
Yeah, it's
this
not
is
that
this
one.
is not this.
It's the
necklace.
one from last episode.
Ah,
it was
episode
Savannah Stain was
5.
wearing. I don't know that it's in this episode. But
Well,
it
I'm
might
still
be.
gonna look at the picture just because I want to see. I just think that's funny.
It's a golden
It would
one
be
with the triple
it would be
folds.
great if Damon has like
Yeah.
5 of those necklaces and he gives it to all of his ladies.
Yeah, it would be funny. It's like I give them to all my girlfriends.
Oh yeah, that one. That one. I
I
remember.
give them
that
all
one
my
was very like. I remember looking at that and thinking it was very sea snake, very Valarian esque.
Yeah.
Like had that like the curves of. Yeah.
It might be a seahorse.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
let's see over here. Yeah.
Because like
yeah, that is what it
Rhaenyra's
makes
got
me
the
think of as
little
like
twirly
a like
thing,
a
but there's,
very
seahorse tail.
abstract looking seahorse tail. But yeah,
It's a
it's
seahorse
very,
eating its tail instead of a snake
yeah.
eating its tail. Yeah.
Seahorse eating its tail. Different kind of Ouroboros.
Well, that's what
Yeah.
happens when seahorses mate with dragons. They start to take on that serpentine behavior. Yeah. So I think maybe what'll push Alicent towards having her kids marry is seeing when Rhaenyra goes back to Dragonstone and her kids start to get dragons. She might be like that might
Oh,
intimidate
I
her.
bet.
Like, okay, if her kids are going to try to, if her kids have dragons, I need our kids to have dragons. We need to be even more Targaryen than them.
So my question is, I mean, what will cause her to reject the Helaena? Because like obviously a clear solution and one that I believe is mentioned in Fire and Blood is the idea that Jace marries Helaena.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a girl.
They're
There's
not
what?
that far
Like,
off.
Yeah.
And maybe Alicent in her head is like, no, I don't want Helena
Marrying a bastard.
That isn't. Yeah, marrying
Yeah.
a bastard. That's just going to make things more complex because Aegon is like,
Mhm.
I feel like it'll be proposed and Alicent will reject
Yeah.
it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Curtis Frank says it's an arms race. Yes, it is very much an arms race. It is an arms race. It's a hateful arms race. That's why I think Alicent would never do this if she didn't hate Rhaenyra or hate where things were going. She would never ask. You'd never be in a position where her 7 worshipping ways would bow to Targaryen customs and be like, yeah, I'll marry my kids together. Like, she would never have done that otherwise. I mean, she may have been forced to if, like, her husband was like, you got to do this, but...
Because the only reason Otto even brings it up the one time is because he's like, I want a way to make Aegon the heir, and maybe the only way to do it is to marry him to Rhaenyra, so that Viserys, like, to kind of slip it under the rug for Viserys.
Yeah, I think for Otto it's ambition, and for Alicent it's paranoia and hatred. Which is leading him to the same kind of...
Yeah,
and Otto implanted that paranoia and hatred in her.
Yeah, Otto implanted that. Like, Otto is 100% the reason for Alicent's paranoia.
Absolutely.
Like, when I was rewatching episode 5, like, the scene at the beginning between the two of them, it made me so mad on rewatch. Because everything he tells her is not true.
Like, or it's heavily exaggerated. Maybe a scene
or it's heavily exaggerated.
Might kill your kids. I don't even know about that. Like, there's no reason to say it's a definite.
No, there's no reason. And the other thing he doesn't tell her, like, Viserys didn't fire him because of Rhaenyra.
Yeah.
Viserys fired him because his judgment was compromised.
Yes.
That is why Viserys fired him. And Otto does not tell Alicent this. And as far as we can tell, Viserys doesn't tell Alicent this.
No,
this is also part
leans
of
into it. He's like, you got me fired. He's like, basically.
No, you're right.
Sorry, I have a dog. Let me eject this dog.
So what? We have only a couple things left. This shot of a guy in prison. What is that about? I wonder. Maybe I guess we'll figure that out. It looks like the black cells. It comes up while Larys is doing his voiceover. Don't know who that is. Maybe we're not supposed to know who that is, but I guess we'll find out. There's also like a knife being heated up, probably some sort of torture preparation. So that looks like unpleasant, but I'm not entirely sure what it's related to. Maybe it's getting information out of someone who may have witnessed something or...
Yeah, I was guessing that we're seeing Larys being master whisperers and seeing people in a jail cell. That's my theory, is that we're seeing this is Larys.
Knife?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The knife being heated might be childbirth related, though.
Yeah.
That's
we
true.
might get another C-section, and it's not going to be good.
That's true. I wonder, and also Larys' first role in book canon is that he was one of the king's confessors, which isn't that sometimes synonymous with torturing? Not always, but sometimes?
Yes.
Okay.
The term confess, like, that's the way that they describe confessors in Fire and Blood. Like, it seems to me like a combination of people who work for the Master of Whisperers and or torturers. Like, because the term confessor, like the medieval term, like confessor and priest are the same thing. Like, this is someone to whom you confess your sins. But here, I feel like confessor is being used in the sense of get confessions out of people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not take confessions.
Not taking confession. They're not taking confession. They're taking.
They're making. Yeah, exactly.
We're not taking confessions. We're taking confessions.
So we'll see about that with that heated knife and that prison thing, whether they're related or not. I'm very curious about that, but not much we can do, but wait and see.
Yeah.
In terms of that. All right.
So I would love to go through just real quick and say a couple things about a couple images I wanted to put
up.
Great.
Yeah. Do it.
One, this is a shot of Rhaenyra's wedding cloak from the HBO House of the Dragon site that shows the Velaryon sigil on one side and the Targaryen on the other. We didn't really get a good look at it in the episode, so I wanted to take a moment to highlight this. Really beautiful work there. It kind of gives us a glimpse at the quartered sigil that Rhaenyra might eventually take, or maybe she does a half version and doesn't do the Aaron in her sigil, is my theory on that. And maybe they don't throw the Aaron part in.
The Aaron thing is interesting because when I was rewatching, one of the things I noticed is that they do a bunch of shots in the first episode of Emma's ring.
Yeah.
And Emma's ring, I am fairly certain, has the Aaron sigil on it.
It looked like that to me too.
And then the sigil actually reappears in the opening credits.
Yeah,
Right,
that's
for
that's her emblem. Her
For
sy-
Emma's,
yeah.
for
During the
Emma's
bloodline.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good catch for sure.
And so I was actually looking for the rest of when I was rewatching all of the subsequent episodes, I was actually looking to see if Rhaenyra ever wore that ring, because it would be just a very easy, very sort of subtle touch to make, but I didn't notice it.
Okay.
So maybe if anyone else has, or if anyone else has
You're gonna
like
cut to
higher resolution screen caps.
see
But
the real terrible thing will be if you cut to it and you see that Alicent is wearing the ring.
Oh god.
that would hurt.
no.
Oh my god. Like, Viserys, why? Or maybe Viserys is wearing it actually. I
That would
don't
be
know
nice.
for
That would
that.
be appropriate.
Viserys might be
That would
wearing
be
it.
really sweet.
That would be fitting,
That would be
'cause
very nice.
would
He really did love her.
be.
That,
Yeah.
there's no.
He did.
no-
Like
no
I
doubt
mean,
about that.
notwithstanding that I 100% disagree with all of his actions concerning her, I do think he did care about her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
I
yeah.
agree.
I
So yeah, I
definitely
wanted to go through just real quick all the shots and just put them on screen. We have Rhaenyra and the council, Aemond, and this is him looking at a dragon.
Yeah, I forgot to
As-
mention
yeah,
this
we
one.
forget,
This is from the very early trailer, so we're getting that scene this time.
Yeah.
He maybe is going to flirt with getting his own dragon, but we know he doesn't get one until Vhagar.
Yeah, he doesn't get. Yeah, this is not Vhagar. This is a dragon that's able to be indoors, so we know for a fact this could not be Vhagar. Also, Vhagar is off in Pentos with Lena.
Yeah, that wouldn't
multiple
work.
reasons. We get
Maybe it's whichever dragon was in his crib, because
Oh, yeah.
presumably all of them got dragon eggs, and we don't really hear about Viserys and Alicent's kids.
Yeah.
We don't get the detail the way that we do with Rhaenyra's kids and their
Yeah.
dragon eggs.
I think that they didn't get dragon eggs early on. I think that they were allowed to choose adult dragons, and that I think was the earlier custom. I think the dragon egg in cribs custom wasn't established at this point. I think this may have been what established it, because I think it was like others have pointed out in calling it an arms race. They're trying to give these kids, get ready for the inevitable succession crisis that's coming, and it's very sad that dragons are being
Rhaenyra
given
was the first person to do the dragon eggs thing.
And we'll
Yeah.
see
She
her
put
with
one-
her egg.
yeah.
As we see right here, she's cradling her egg while she cuddles with her pregnant mother.
You're
Lena.
talking about Rhaenyra,
Oh,
Queen of the
Rhaenyra,
West.
yeah,
I'm talking about earlier
Yeah,
Rhaenyra.
Rhaenyra
Yeah,
and
Rhaenyra.
Dreamfire.
She put an egg in. Oh, who was it? Was it Alicent? I think it was Alisane's cradle, because there's this reference in Fire and Blood when Rhaena is young. She's the person who decides, okay, I'm going to get a dragon's egg and put it in the cradle of one of my siblings. I don't remember which sibling it was. It might have been Jaehaerys. It might have been Alicent. But it was one of her siblings. I feel like that's how it went.
I think Vermithor may have hatched before Jaehaerys, so I think that makes it. But I think Silverwing was, I think that fits. Yeah. Someone here in the chat, Arya Saxena, says the dragon eggs and crib was established by Rhaena.
Yeah.
There you go.
So then we will see her later namesake, Rhaena, with the dragon egg, and that's where we'll see, these eggs in braziers.
Christina
shots.
K says it was Alicent and Jaehaerys did both get eggs. Okay, she did it for both. All right, cool. That's good. No wonder. All right,
And so we will see lots more of this dragon egg and the hatching and the dragon stuff. So that'll be really
dragon arms
interesting.
race.
We also, as we said, we saw Aegon. Here's more with Rhaena, Lena, and Damon riding. There
Dragon
is
keepers with
Vermax,
Vermax.
For Jaehaerys.
We don't know what this scene is about.
Yeah,
They're standing out there
yeah.
in his
and his
night
pajamas.
clothes.
Yeah, I'm not sure what
She's holding baby
disturbs
Joffrey
them.
there. Yeah, I don't know what that's
it
about.
might be them finding out about some terrible news.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
potentially. I don't know. It looks like she's still creating the baby. I'm not sure. We got Lionel, Viserys looking decrepit and very old. Harwin looking very sexy as always,
Harwin,
and even
Criston.
sexier when he beats up Criston Cole here. Looking the best he's
Yes.
ever looked when he beats him up. I do not condone violence, but in that case, maybe a little bit. But no, I really like the
I
reaction.
condone violence against Criston Cole.
I really like these kids. We got Leo Hart who plays Jaehaerys, and then Harvey Sadler is this like chubby cheeked like the younger Luke. So we got those two, and then we got baby Joffrey.
There he is.
Of
Yep.
course. So
Little
we
With
will
his
see.
little pug nose.
Yeah.
They chose the right kid.
We got Viserys still looking at his model.
Yep.
And then the scene where it looks like maybe this is now.
That's Jaehaerys, I think. A gloved hand.
You mean Viserys? Yeah.
Sorry, yes, Viserys.
Talking
yes.
to Jaehaerys.
Maybe telling him you're going to be the heir, and all that. This throne will be yours.
Oh.
Yeah.
So a nice scene with those together. Alicent and Larys, which we talked about, and the prisoner.
I guess Sunfire could have been. Someone's pointing out Sunfire could have been a crib egg too. It's like you said, though, it isn't well.
Sunfire
described
might have
in-
been. I don't remember.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's not
Sunfire-
well described
I think I
in
looked it up
Fire and
recently,
Blood.
and it seemed to me that Sunfire was had to be a little bit older, but I forget what pointed that to me. It was something about like him taming. I'd have to check, but it didn't seem obvious.
Bears further
Yeah.
research.
But look, I'll also note that the scene of Jace taking his dragon, like he looks like so delighted about getting his dragon, but then one of the shots is the dragon torching like a little lamb.
Well, that's what that
Something.
is.
It's like a little, like you could see it here. It's like
Yeah.
a goat, a lamb, or whatever. But like,
Oh.
it's very symbolic. The idea, and like he's like
Lamb to the
grinning
slaughter.
and
Yeah.
doing this. I'm like,
He's the one being sent to the slaughter.
It's like that scene in Jurassic Park with the velociraptors.
yeah,
This is too
Yeah.
much
yeah.
weapon for a child. I mean, it's like arming a child. Like we've called dragons in different contexts, nuclear weapons, B-52 bombers. Are you really giving that kid?
Yeah, this
This
kid,
little dude?
yeah.
You're giving him a dragon? You're giving these two
These
dragons?
both?
Like,
Yeah.
I don't care
Well-
how good of boys they are. They shouldn't be wielding
No.
nuclear bombs. I mean, in
Like,
that
I- would probably-
Rhaenyra.
Yeah, yeah.
Rhaenyra was a dragon rider at age 7.
yeah, that's what they do.
And she's like, as far as I'm aware, she's the youngest.
Yeah, that is one of the
wild.
youngest. Yeah, if not the
For the
youngest.
dams.
You're right.
So
It is
wild.
wild. I have a 6-year-old.
Yeah,
The
can you
thought
imagine?
of,
A year from now, riding a
that is-
dragon?
oh my god, no.
You don't even want them
No.
going on a roller coaster, let alone.
Yeah,
Put
yeah.
her on a roller coaster, fine. Like I'll put her on a roller coaster, put her on a horse, whatever. But oh my god, no.
And so yeah, so I think what'll be interesting is probably the placement of these scenes. We'll see exactly why these boys should not have dragons, because we're gonna see this training yard scene where they're all fighting each other.
Like, I agree with
and
the
then
laws.
They're gonna
The
go
kid
give him a
shouldn't-
dragon.
Yeah, I agree with the laws. A kid shouldn't have firecrackers. You know, like this is a lot more flame-inducing and creating, and yeah, oof.
Well, and we also know from Viserys, like, how much you control the dragon is at least partly dependent on the dragon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we saw with Balerion and Araya.
How
you
much
can't
is
always...
Aemon controlling Vagar, and how much is Vagar controlling Aemon? Like,
Yeah. Does the
Yeah.
bond like impact the Dragon Rider's personality a bit? Like, is it a two-way street?
I'm of the opinion. I think it does. I
can
think
see
we
it.
get hints of that
Yeah.
because I feel like we see that with Damon and Caraxes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Mhm.
I feel like Damon and Caraxes is kind of one of the best examples of seeing kind of the back and forth intertwined relationship between the dragon and the rider, where like the dragon influences the rider and the rider influences the dragon. Because before Damon rode Caraxes, he belonged to Aemon. He belonged to Jaehaerys and Alysanne's eldest son, who rode him into war in the stepstones. Again, it's the fucking stepstones.
It's always a
And
stepstone.
so, yeah, it's always the stepstones. So we have kind of this dragon that is already ridden into war, and then Damon claims him when he's like 16 or something. Like, he's relatively young. He's not as young as Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra is like alarmingly young.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like Damon, like, because Damon and Viserys both claim their initial dragons when they're teenagers, I feel.
Mhm.
And Viserys, of course, gets Balerion, and then Balerion immediately dies.
Yeah, I think
and
he was
we
14
never
or
get
15,
the sense that
when he got him.
yeah, and we never get the sense that Viserys tried to claim another dragon.
No, we don't.
Though he could have. Like, there were plenty of them around. He
Oh,
could
yeah.
have grabbed any
Yeah.
number of them, but
Yeah. He could have
but
had
he
the next
never
biggest
bothered.
one. He could have had Vagar.
yeah, he could have taken Vagar. Like, I think at that point, Vagar realized dad at that point. I think. Because Vagar, like,
No.
or maybe no. Maybe,
yeah, Vagar was
Vagar
written by his dad.
no.
His dad died in 101, and
Mhm.
then he was open. But if he had claimed a new dragon before 101, Vagar wasn't available. But yeah, he went dragonless from like 94 on until 129. So
Yeah.
35 years of being
And for the
dragonless.
entirety of his reign,
Yeah,
too.
yeah, which is a little easier. I was glad they inserted that point about him being a little uneasy around dragons to kind of explain
Mhm.
that. You know,
Yeah.
that was
It does.
good, like,
No, I mean,
two-liner there.
well, frankly, if your only experience riding a dragon is the Black Dread,
yeah, it might be a
I
little
can see
intimidating.
how either all other dragons would be disappointing, or no, this was too goddamn scary. I remember
There were probably some ropes on Balerion too.
Yeah, you're right. Probably.
I bet there were ropes
him,
on Balerion.
But no, I do lean towards the second interpretation, given Viserys is how he is in House of the Dragon, at least. For sure. And it has had me wondering about what kind of information the people who pair with the dragon get from the dragon, and what kind of memories and things are communicated to them. Because again, like, Vhagar has seen some stuff. Like, and so like the idea of Aemon being tapped into that at all is super interesting. Like it's super interesting.
Vhagar was part of the destruction of Dorne. Like, going around torching lots of things, which Aemon will repeat.
Yeah. Vhagar's like, I know how to do this.
It's like, I've done this before in the desert. It's much nicer here in the Riverlands.
It's like that one meme.
Oh, yeah.
Of the old lady.
Yeah, I know the exact meme
Which made me so sad.
It's like, it's Aemon, like, leading around an edit of an old lady like Vhagar, you know? And Vhagar's like, what are we doing now, Visenya?
It's so
We're
sad.
burning the Riverlands.
Yeah.
Like, it's so funny, but it's so sad. Like, I feel so
sad.
bad for, like, my old grumpy lady Vhagar. Like, I feel so bad for her. Like, she's old and she's grumpy and she just wants to be left alone. Aemon, why can't you just leave her
We were
alone?
almost going to see her in episode 2. We had to wait. Now we get to see her tomorrow. So look forward to that. Enjoy, everyone.
Yeah.
And with that,
we got to
say goodbye.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a nice
a little bit over our usual
it's
length.
nice,
That's okay.
though.
That's
That was
okay.
good.
It's definitely okay. We got a lot of real world education today. That fit in very nicely.
Yeah.
It was very nicely. Thanks very much, Dr. Kavita Mudan Finn, for coming on and talking to us. It was a real pleasure, and we learned a lot. A lot of people in the chat said the same thing. They said, I learned a lot today.
Yeah, we did. And
thank you. That's my goal.
Right on. Tell people where to find your
people.
blog and anything else you want to point their attention to.
I'll drop a link in the chat, but for our podcast listeners, let them know where to find you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my blog is at kvmfinn.wordpress.com. I have been doing recaps of all of the episodes of House of the Dragon thus far, plus a couple of just sort of general essays as topics strike me. I end up writing a lot about history and historiography and the way that Fire and Blood is written. And the reason that happens is because that was my research. That's what I did. So I end up writing a lot about Fire and Blood, but that's not a bad thing.
No,
definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah.
Yes. Everyone very happy today.
Oh, we got you were an S tier guest from Dom Tartaglia. That's as you know, that's the highest of the tier. So that's quite a compliment.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, I was really excited to have you on. We haven't had you on before, but I knew that you had listened to a podcast in the past, and so I was really very excited for this.
Yeah.
I have been a lurker for for a while now.
Right on. Well, thanks everyone else for attending live today. We appreciate your presence. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate your comments and any thoughts or theories or ideas you have. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for our awesome maps and our older video intro. For our newer video intro, thank you to Bran the Builder, Bran Winslow, for that, both the music and the video. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for our regular History of Westeros theme music and outro music. Thanks to all of our lovely patrons for both supporting us on Patreon and on Spotify subscriptions. That number's been growing as well. Either one is a way to support us and get bonus episodes and bonus content. So check those out if you are so inclined. And until next time, unless there's any final thoughts.
I think we're good. We covered it all.
Cool.
I can't wait for tomorrow. Like every
First
week,
half.
I'm like, I just can't wait. I'm so excited to
Beginning
see.
of the second half. The new actresses, new actor, all this new stuff. 10 years. What a thing.
I guess real quick, what are you each most excited for tomorrow before we go? Just tell me about Vhagar for you. I'm most excited. I'm excited. Oh, for Lena. I'm most excited to see Helaena, as it turns out.
Okay.
Lena
and Helaena.
It's funny because I've been saying I love Lena so much every week, but I'm so intrigued by this critter box. So I'm excited. Let us know in the chat what you're most excited for tomorrow.
Yes. All right, folks. Enjoy the episode. Thanks again, Dr. Kavita, and we will see you all soon. Valar reread us. Watch out for spoilers, though. And Valar rewatch us.